Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and settle into wherever you happen to be resting tonight. There is nothing here that asks anything of you, and nowhere at all you need to be. Most evenings we walk out into a garden together, or lean over a still room table, or move slowly along a hedgerow gathering what grows there. Tonight we do something a little quieter still. We open a single book. Not a whole library, not a whole tradition, but one book, more than 1,000 years old, written by hand in the Old English tongue by a scribe named Cild, for a man named Bold. It has come down to us almost whole, its leaves of vellum still turnable, its ink still dark on the page. It is called Bold's Leechbook, and it is one of the oldest medical books in any European language that we still possess. We are going to spend the whole of this long night turning through it, slowly, the way you might turn the pages of an old family book by candlelight, in no hurry to reach the end. We will read who made it, and why, and what a leech was, in the old sense of that word, before it ever meant the small creature in the pond. We will follow the book down its careful ordering, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet. We will sit with its most famous page, an eye salve of garlic and wine that a laboratory brewed again in our own time, and with the herbs, the charms, the elves, and the quiet good sense folded in among them. There is no need to remember any of this. Let the names drift past you like water. If your eyes have closed before we are halfway down the first page, that is exactly as it should be, and there is nothing at all you will have missed. Settle in. Let us open the book. The book itself is not large. If you could hold it in your 2 hands tonight, and you cannot, for it rests behind glass and locked doors, you would find it smaller than you expected, a modest volume of pale vellum leaves, each one made from the prepared skin of a calf or a sheep, scraped thin, smoothed, and cut to size by hands that have been dust for 1,000 years. It is bound now in a later cover, but the pages within are the original ones, and the ink upon them was mixed in the 10th century from oak galls and iron and gum, the same dark brown ink that scribes across the whole of early England trusted to outlast them. It has, in the plainest sense, done exactly that. To make a single leaf of that book was itself a long and patient labor, carried out long before the scribe ever set pen to it. The skin of a young animal was soaked in a bath of lime for days to loosen the hair, then stretched taut on a wooden frame and scraped over and over with a curved blade until it was even and thin and pale. It was smoothed with pumice, rubbed with chalk to take the ink cleanly, and cut down to size. A book of this length swallowed the skins of a small flock. Every page you might turn tonight began as a living creature in an Anglo-Saxon field and passed through the hands of the parchment maker, the ink maker, and at last the scribe, before it ever held a word. There is a whole quiet economy of care standing behind the plainest medieval page. The book lies today in London, in the British Library, catalogued with the quiet, unpoetic name that libraries give their treasures. It is Royal Manuscript 12D17, one item among many thousands, kept in the cool, dim, carefully watched conditions that old vellum needs to survive another 1,000 years. A reader who wishes to see it must ask, and wait and handle it, if at all, with the greatest care, on a cushioned rest, turning each leaf with a slow and deliberate patience that the book itself seems almost to teach. For most of us it exists now as photographs, every page scanned and lit, and made freely visible, so that a person anywhere in the world may look tonight upon the very lines that Cild set down by candlelight so long ago. What strikes almost everyone who studies the manuscript first is the hand. The whole of Bold's Leechbook, all its many remedies across all its leaves, was written out by a single scribe. One person, sitting for weeks or more likely months at a sloped desk, cut and trimmed the quills, mixed and remixed the ink, ruled the faint guiding lines across each page, and then filled them, line after patient line, in a clear and steady Old English script that scholars have come to know as well as an old friend's handwriting. The letters lean the same way from the first page to the last. The hand grows, if anything, only more assured as it goes. This was not hurried work, and it was not casual work. It was the careful copying of a book someone valued enough to pay for. It is, at the same time, a plain book to look upon. There is no gold on these pages, no painted saints in the margins, none of the glittering decoration that the great gospel books of the same age carried. Where a monastery might spend a fortune making a book of scripture blaze with color, this book was made to be used, not admired. Its one concession to ornament is the red ink that marks the opening of each remedy. A small rubricated word or letter to help a reader find his place quickly by lamplight when someone was ailing and there was no time to hunt. Even that plainness tells you something true about the book. It was a tool. Its beauty, such as it is the beauty of a thing made well for a real and daily purpose. The maker also thought carefully about how a hurried reader would find what he needed. At the head of each of the book's parts stands a list of its contents, a plain catalogue of the chapters that follow, numbered in order down the body. A leech woken in the night could run a finger down that list, find the trouble he was facing, and turn straight to the leaf that answered it, without reading a word he did not need. It is, in its small way, the same courtesy that a good reference book still offers today, worked out and set down more than 1,000 years ago by people who had exactly the same problem we do. The problem of finding the one thing you need among a great many things you do not. Look closely at any page, and you can still see the faint scaffolding on which the writing stands. Before a scribe wrote a single word, he ruled his lines, scoring the vellum with a hard dry point so that the letters would sit straight and even, and he pricked small holes down the margins to guide those rulings. Tiny punctures still visible along the edges of many an old leaf. The writing hangs from these ruled lines the way washing hangs from a line, orderly and level. It is a small thing, this ruling and pricking, done before the true work even began, and yet it speaks of the care and the method behind the whole, the patient preparing of the ground before a single healing word was set down upon it. There are small human traces on the leaves, too, if you know how to look for them. Here and there the scribe has left a tiny correction, a letter scraped away and written again, a word added above the line where his eye had skipped it the first time. In a few places a later hand, a reader of a generation or two after, has added a small note in the margin, a cross beside a remedy that had perhaps been found to work, a word underlined for a reason we can no longer recover. These are the fingerprints of use. This was never a book meant only to sit on a shelf and be admired. It was a working book, opened and consulted and leaned over by lamplight while someone in the next room was ill. and the marks of that use are still upon it. Picture, if it helps you settle, how such a book was actually used. It did not stand on a shelf in a bright reading room. It lived in a hall or a private chamber, wrapped perhaps in a cloth, or kept in a chest, brought out when it was needed and consulted by the light of a rush lamp or a tallow candle. Its owner would lay it open on a board across his knees or on a table and lean close over it, one finger tracing the lines, reading half aloud to himself in the low murmur. That was the ordinary way of reading in that age, when silent reading was still the rarer skill. The book had weight in the hands, and a faint animal smell to the vellum, warm under the fingers, and it made the small dry sound of a stiff old page turning that anyone who has handled such a book never quite forgets. It was, in every sense, a thing of the body as much as of the mind. The manuscript is written, as the whole of it is, in Old English, the language spoken across much of what is now England, before the coming of the Normans changed the tongue forever. To a modern eye the words look strange and beautiful at once, full of letters we no longer use, the thorn and the ith that stood for the two sounds of, the ash that softened the a. And yet, read slowly and aloud by someone who knows the sounds, a great deal of it is still half familiar. The word for wound, the word for herb, the word for bone, the word for blood. These old plain words have travelled down the centuries and are still, in worn and altered forms, the words we reach for now. To read this book is to hear English speaking about the body and its troubles in almost the earliest voice it ever had. It is a strange and gentle thing to hold in the mind, this survival. 1,000 years is a very long time. Whole kingdoms rose and fell around this small stack of vellum leaves. The language it was written in stopped being spoken, then was studied again as something old and foreign. Fire, damp, mice, war, neglect, and simple forgetting have destroyed the great majority of everything that was ever written in that age, so that we possess only a scattered handful of books from the whole of early England. And yet this one, a plain working manual of cures, kept in no golden shrine and copied in no royal scriptorium so far as we know, happened to survive when so much else did not. There is no grand reason for it. It was simply lucky and cared for and never quite thrown away, and so it is here, waiting to be opened. Let us turn now to the very last words the scribe wrote, and to the two names that have come down to us because of them. At the end of the second book of the collection, after all the remedies are set down, the scribe added a few lines that have given the whole manuscript its name. They are written not in Old English but in Latin, in the manner of a colophon, the small closing note that a medieval scribe might set at the end of a finished work. Rendered into our own tongue, they say, in plain words, that Bald owns this book, which he ordered Cild to write. Bald is the owner, Cild is the scribe, and from these few Latin words, set down more than 1,000 years ago, simply to record who had paid for the book, and who had made it, two otherwise entirely lost people have kept their names into our own age. A colophon was a common thing to find at the close of a medieval book, a small held breath at the end of a long labor. Scribes used it to name themselves, to name the person for whom they had worked, sometimes to give thanks that the task was finished at all, and now and then to complain, gently and in the margins, of cold hands and failing light, and the aching of a back bent all day over the desk. The colophon of Bold's Leechbook is of the naming kind, and it is cast, rather charmingly, in a little run of Latin verse, as though the plain business of recording ownership deserved to be dressed in something better than plain prose. Someone, at the end of all that patient copying, felt the moment was worth a small flourish. We know almost nothing else about either man, and it is worth being honest about that from the beginning. We do not know Bold's face, his age, his village, or his trade beyond the strong likelihood, given that he commissioned a book of cures, that he was himself a healer, or a man wealthy and curious enough to want such knowledge close at hand. The name Bald was a real Old English name, unremarkable in its day, carrying a sense close to bold or brave. He was, it seems, a man of some means, for a book like this was an expensive thing, months of a skilled scribe's labor, and the skins of a small flock besides. Beyond that we have only the book he ordered, which is, when you consider it, not a bad thing to be remembered by. Of Cild we know even less, and yet in a way we know him more intimately than anyone. His name, which means simply child or young man, was likely a byname rather than a given one, the sort of familiar tag a household might use. He was the hand. Every line of the book passed through his fingers. If you wished to feel close to a person out of that distant age, you could do worse than to follow the movement of Cild's pen across a single page, the small rhythm of the letters, the places where he paused, the places where he pressed on. He was a craftsman doing careful work, and he did it well enough that his book is still legible, still whole, still teaching, 1,000 years after he laid down his quill for the last time and, presumably, went to find something warm to eat. It is a strange intimacy, to know a person only by their handwriting across 1,000 years, and yet to know it so well. Scholars who have studied this hand could pick it out anywhere, could tell Cild's letters from another scribe's as surely as we know a friend's writing on an envelope. Of the man himself we have almost nothing, and of his work we have every stroke. It is a lopsided sort of acquaintance, and a touching one, all craft and no face, the whole of him that survives being simply the care he took. Something of the scribe's daily lot survives in the little notes that men like Cild sometimes left in the margins of their work, though not, as it happens, in this particular book. Elsewhere, scribes complained, gently and humanly, of what the task cost them. Their fingers ached, they wrote, and their eyes dimmed, and their backs bent, and the light failed too soon, and the cold crept into the writing room. 3 fingers write, runs one old note, but the whole body labours. We may fairly imagine Cild knowing all of this, his hand cramping over the long weeks of the work, glad of a fine day's light and grudging of a dark one, bending over the vellum through the short hours a winter season allowed, and glad, at the very last, to reach the colophon and lay down his pen. It is likely, though we cannot prove it, that Cild was not composing anything at all, but copying. Bold's Leechbook is a compilation, a gathering together of remedies from many older sources, and the man who first gathered them, sorted them, and set them in their careful order was probably not the same man who wrote out this particular copy. What Bald most likely ordered was a fresh, clean, complete copy of a compilation that already existed, made to his own use, so that he might have the whole of it under one binding and close to hand. That, too, was a common way for knowledge to travel in that age, from one good copy to the next. each scribe a link in a long chain, carrying the words forward a little further in time with every careful page. To own such a book at all set a person somewhat apart. Books were among the costliest things a household could hold, worth as much, sometimes, as a good beast or a small piece of land, and they were counted among a person's treasures, bequeathed in wills, given as gifts between the great. For a man like Bold to commission one, entire and to his own use, spoke of both means and purpose, of someone who valued this knowledge enough to sink real wealth into having it gathered and copied and bound. The curse against thieves that closes the book is only the sharp edge of that same pride of possession. This was a treasure, and its owner knew it and meant to keep it. There is one more detail in that closing note that many readers find quietly touching. In the way of many medieval books, the colophon carries something like a small warning, a curse of the mild and half-joking kind that scribes like to attach to precious volumes, calling down misfortune upon anyone who might carry the book off from its rightful owner. Books were rare and costly things, and this little verbal lock was a common device, half serious and half a scribe's dry humor. It tells us, more than anything, how much such a book was worth to the person who held it. You did not curse a thing you did not treasure. Bold treasured this, enough to have his name and a warning set into it forever. And the warning, in its own way, has held. The book was never lost. It is still here. It is easy to pass over how unusual it is that we know these names at all. The great silence of that age is one of the first things a student of it must learn to accept. For every book that survives, 100 are lost, and for every person whose name comes down to us, many thousands lived and worked and died without leaving so much as a mark. Most of the scribes who copied most of the books of early England are entirely nameless to us now, their careful labor surviving without the smallest trace of who they were. To have a scribe's own name, and the owners beside it, attached to a whole surviving book, is a small piece of great good fortune, the kind of accident that lets a single ordinary life reach forward and touch a stranger across 1,000 years. Bold and Cild are, in a sense, standing in for all the others we will never know. It is worth pausing, too, on how ordinary all of this must have felt at the time. Bold did not think he was making a thing that would outlast his whole civilization. He wanted a good, reliable book of cures, the best that could be had, copied out clearly so that when someone came to his door with a fever or a wound he could turn to the right page and know what to do. Cild did not think he was writing for us. He thought he was finishing a commission and glad, no doubt, to be nearing the end of a long task. Neither of them could have imagined a listener 1,000 years on, in a world they could not have pictured at all, lying quiet in the dark and thinking gently of the two of them by name. And yet here we are, and there they are, held together across all that distance by nothing more than a few careful lines of ink that neither ever thought to be remarkable. We will turn now to the strange old word that gives the book its name, and to what it really meant to be a leech in that far-off time. The word Leechbook simply means the book of the leech, and to understand it we have to set aside, gently, the first picture the word calls up in a modern mind. A leech, to us, is the small dark creature of ponds and slow rivers, the one that fastens to the skin and draws blood. But that is not what the word meant to Bold or to Cild or to anyone who used this book. In the Old English tongue, a leeches was a healer, a physician, the man or woman you sent for when someone was ill. Leechcraft was the craft of healing itself, the whole body of knowledge and skill by which the sick were tended. And a Leechbook was exactly what its name says, the handbook of that craft, the healer's own book of what to do. So the very title of this manuscript, once you hear it rightly, is warm rather than strange. It is the healer's book. When we say Bald's Leechbook, we are saying Bald's book of healing, his working manual of cures, and nothing more sinister than that. The whole vocabulary of the thing is like this: old plain English words for old plain things, and it rewards a little slowing down to listen to. The tangle with the small creature of the pond is worth untangling, since so many people trip over it. In the old language there were two words that came, over the centuries, to sound and look very much alike. One meant the healer, the other meant the blood-drawing worm. Scholars still debate whether these began as two entirely separate words that simply drifted together, or whether one gave its name to the other. What is certain is that the two ideas became knotted in people's minds for a very good practical reason. Healers used the little creature. Drawing off blood was among the commonest of all old treatments, and the worm was one gentle way to do it, so that the animal that drew blood and the person who drew blood came to share a single name. The creature, you might say, was named after the trade, or the trade lent the creature its name, and by the time anyone wondered which had come first, the two had long since grown together. For our purposes tonight, though, the leech is always the healer, and the Leechbook always the healer's book. Let the pond creature swim off into the dark. It has no place in Bald's careful pages, or almost none, and it is the human leech, the patient man or woman bent over the sick bed, that this whole book was made to serve. Around that central word gathers a whole small vocabulary of the old craft, and it is a pleasure to turn a few of these words over slowly, the way you might turn smooth stones in the hand. A remedy in this book is a leechdom, a healing thing, a cure. When the great Victorian scholar who first printed the book gave it a title, he reached for exactly this word and called his volumes leechdoms, so that the old term came back into the light 3 centuries later. A herb is a wort, the same little word that still hides inside the names of our plants, in mugwort and St. John's wort and a dozen others, and inside the lovely old word wortkunning, which means simply the knowledge of plants, the lore of what each green thing is good for. A salve is a sylph, so close to our own word for it that the 1,000 years between hardly show. A medicinal drink, a draught brewed to be swallowed, is a drench, the ancestor of our word to drench, though the old draught was measured and gentle, where the modern word has grown rough. A bath is a bee, a poultice, a plaster, a bandage, each has its own plain name. And running quietly through all of them is another word, bletsung, a blessing, for the healer's craft was never only herbs and salves and draughts, but words as well, spoken over the sick. And we shall come to those in their own good time, the words for the body itself and for the troubles that befell it, run on in the same unbroken line. Bone was bane, blood was blood, a wound was a wand, and to be sick was to be seoke, while sore was sar. Say them slowly, and they are almost the same words still. This is one of the quiet marvels of reading a book like this, that the deepest and oldest and most necessary words, the ones a frightened person reaches for when the body fails, have changed the least of all across the centuries. Kingdoms fell, and the grand words of law and learning were swept away and replaced with others. But bone stayed bone, and blood stayed blood, because these are the words we can least do without. There were no universities in England when this book was made, no examinations, no licenses, no colleges of physicians with their gowns and their fees. To be a leech was to practice a craft, learned much as any craft was learned, from a master, from long watching and doing, and from books exactly like this one. A good leech book was a leech's most valued possession, the distilled knowledge of many earlier healers gathered where he could reach it, so that he need not carry the whole of medicine in his own head. In a world with few doctors and fewer books, to own such a manual was to hold a small and genuine power, the power to help, and it is no wonder Bald guarded his with a curse against thieves. Many of the leeches who used such books were themselves men of the church, monks and priests, whose houses kept gardens of healing herbs and small rooms set aside for the sick. In an age when the monastery was the nearest thing to a hospital, the care of the body and the care of the soul often lay in the very same hands. The infirmary, the brother charged with tending the ailing of his house, needed exactly a book like this, and it is very likely that hands like his copied, owned, and wore soft the pages of many a leech book now long lost. The healer and the holy man were, in that world, frequently one and the same person, and the medicine and the prayer flowed together in his work without any sense of strain between them. A leech of standing was trusted with the most frightening moments of his neighbors' lives. The fever that would not break, the wound that would not close, the birth that had turned difficult in the night. That trust was not lightly given, and it was not lightly held. It had to be earned slowly, cure by cure, and it could be lost in a single bad season, and so the good leech carried his knowledge with a certain gravity, aware always of how much rested on his getting it right. His book was the steadying weight behind that responsibility, the gathered voice of all the healers who had gone before him, telling him quietly what they had learned so that he need not learn it all again, alone, at the bedside, in the dark. There is one small survival of that old word that many people still carry without knowing it. The finger we now call the ring finger, the fourth of the hand, was known in the old tongue as the leech finger, the healer's finger, for it was believed that a vine or a sinew ran straight from it to the heart. A healer was said to stir and to test his medicines with that finger above all, trusting that it would feel, by its very nearness to the heart, anything harmful that might lie in the mixture. The belief was mistaken, but it was tenacious, and it is one reason the ring is worn upon that finger still. In some old customs, a faint and forgotten echo of the leech reaching into his pot with the one finger he trusted the most. There is a plainness and an honesty in this old vocabulary that is easy to love. The healer is the healer, the herb is the herb, the salve is the salve. There is no grand professional armor of long Latin names, no attempt to make the knowledge sound more difficult or more exclusive than it was. The words are the same word, everyday words a person would use for the same things in the kitchen or the garden, lifted only a little by the seriousness of their purpose. To read this book in its own language is to feel how close medicine still stood in that age to ordinary daily life, to the hearth, the pot, the garden bed, and the patient hands that tended all three. There is no need to hold any of these words in memory. Let them pass. It is enough tonight simply to know that when we say Leechbook, we mean the healer's own quiet book, and that everything in it, salve and draught and blessing alike, was set down by people who used the plainest words they had for the oldest trouble there is. The trouble of a body that has fallen ill, and a neighbour who wants to help it mend. Let us turn now to the place where this book was most likely made, and to the king whose shadow, some believe, falls across its pages. Bald's Leechbook was written, as nearly as scholars can tell, in the middle years of the 10th century, and most likely at Winchester, in the old kingdom of Wessex, in the south of what we now call England. Winchester in that age was no ordinary town. It was, as much as anywhere was, the heart of the West Saxon kingdom, the seat of its kings, the home of a great church, and a gathering place of learning at a time when learning was rare and hard won. If a book of this ambition was going to be made anywhere in England, a place like Winchester, with its scriptorium and its scholars and its steady supply of skins and ink, is exactly where you would expect to find the hands to make it. It is worth pausing a moment in that town, as it stood then, to picture the world the book came from. Winchester kept the straight old streets, laid down long before by the Romans, lined now with timber houses under the smoke of many hearths, and over the rooftops rose a great stone minster whose bells marked the hours of prayer across the whole town. Kings held their court there, and were crowned and buried there among the old bones of earlier kings. Monks moved along the cloisters between the offices of the day, and in their writing room, a cold chamber made as bright as it could be with whatever light the season allowed, scribes sat copying the books the age most needed. Somewhere in or near that world of bell and quill and slow candlelight, our book took shape, one careful commission among the many that such a place produced. To feel why the book matters, it helps to remember the age just before it. The 9th century had been a hard and frightening time across much of England, an age of raids and burnings, when the Viking armies came year after year, and monasteries, which were then the great storehouses of books and learning, were among the first things burned. A very great deal of knowledge was lost in those years, and the man who felt that loss most keenly, and did the most to mend it, was King Alfred of Wessex, whom later ages would call Alfred the Great. Alfred reigned in the closing decades of the 9th century, a generation or two before our book was copied, and he grieved openly, in words that still survive, at how far learning in England had decayed. So few men were left, he wrote, who could even read the Latin of the old books, that the wisdom in them was locked away and going to waste. His answer was as practical as it was bold. He gathered scholars to his court, and he set them, and himself, to translating the most useful books out of Latin and into plain English, so that the knowledge in them might be shared with everyone who could read the common tongue, and not only with the few who had the older learning. He wanted wisdom to be in the language of the people. It is this spirit, some scholars believe, that stands behind a book like Bald's Leechbook. Here is a great gathering of medical knowledge, drawn from many older and grander sources, and set down not in Latin but in English, in the plain tongue, so that a healer who had never studied the old languages might still reach the wisdom of the physicians who came before. Whether or not the book was made at Alfred's own wish, and we cannot prove that it was, it belongs unmistakably to his kind of project, the bringing of useful knowledge home into English, out of the locked rooms of Latin, and into the hands of ordinary skilled people who could actually use it. And there is one passage in the book that makes the connection to Alfred almost startlingly direct. Tucked among the remedies of the second book is a small collection of cures, which the manuscript itself says were sent to King Alfred by Elias, the Patriarch of Jerusalem. Set that sentence down slowly and let its distances open out. A churchman in Jerusalem, at the far eastern edge of the Christian world, sending a bundle of remedies across the whole breadth of the known earth, to a king on a rain-washed island at its western edge, and those remedies then copied, decades later, into a working handbook that has come down to our own night. Whether the tale is exactly true in every detail, the old book records it plainly, and it tells us something we might otherwise forget. For Anglo-Saxon England was never the small closed corner we sometimes imagine it. Its people traded, travelled, and made pilgrimage across astonishing distances. Its churchmen kept up letters with the great cities of the Mediterranean and beyond. Knowledge, along with silk and spices and coin, moved along those same long roads and sea lanes, so that a cure known in the Eastern Mediterranean might in time find its way onto an English page. The Leechbook is, among its many other things, a quiet record of that connectedness, a book of the far south and east copied out by a scribe in the damp and candlelit north. You can see that same long reach in the very ingredients some of the remedies call for. Alongside the homely English herbs of hedge and garden, the book now and then asks for things that never grew on English soil at all: pepper from the distant east, ginger, frankincense, spices that had travelled thousands of miles by ship and packhorse and river barge before they reached an English shelf. Such things were costly and rare, luxuries as much as medicines, kept in small amounts and used with care. Their quiet presence in the book is another small proof that the healers of that age reached, when they could, for the whole of the known world's store of remedies, and not only for what grew outside their own door. There is something quietly moving in that, if you let yourself sit with it. A leech in a small English town, opening this book by lamplight, might follow a recipe first gathered by a Greek physician centuries before, carried west in Latin, sent perhaps as a gift from a churchman in Jerusalem, and copied at last into his own plain tongue. The knowledge in his hands had crossed seas and centuries and languages to reach him, worn smooth by all the hands it had passed through, and he used it, most likely, without ever thinking of the long road it had travelled. He simply reached for the cure that worked, as healers always have, and the whole vast journey of it lay folded, invisible, into a few lines of English on a single page. There is a further reason the figure of Alfred hovers so naturally over a book of cures. The king was, by the account of those who knew him, a man much troubled by ill health through the whole of his life, visited by a painful and recurring sickness that no physician of his day could master. A man so afflicted and so bent on gathering useful knowledge into English would have had every reason to take an interest in the healing arts, to seek out remedies from wherever they might be had, even from as far away as Jerusalem. Whether or not he ever held a book like this one in his hands, the meeting of a learned, ailing, knowledge, hungry king, and a great gathering of cures in the plain tongue, is a picture the mind assembles almost of its own accord. By the time Cild bent to his work, Winchester was flourishing again. The hard years had passed, the great churches were being renewed, and a movement to restore the monasteries and their learning was in full and vigorous swing, led by reforming churchmen whose names still stand large in the history of that age. Books were being copied once more, gardens tended, the sick cared for in monastic infirmaries. Into this steadier, more hopeful world came Bald's book, a fruit of the revival, gathering up the medicine of many lands and many centuries and setting it down, safe at last, in the plain and enduring English of its day. That such a book could be made at all was a mark of how far the recovery had come. A generation or two before, in the worst of the hard years, there would have been neither the peace, nor the scholars, nor the settled writing room to produce it. That it exists is itself a small monument to the mending of a broken age, a sign that learning had steadied enough, once more, for a man to commission a great book of cures, and find the patient hands to make it. We will turn now to the shape of the book itself, and to the careful, unhurried way it leads a reader down the whole length of the human body. Open the book properly now, past its first leaves, and you find that it is not one book but three, bound together between the same covers. The first two are the ones that carry Bald's name in that closing verse, and it is these two that we mean most strictly when we speak of Bald's Leechbook. The third is a separate and rather older feeling collection, gathered by different hands from different sources, that came in time to be bound with the other two, and we will give it its own attention later in the night. For now, let us follow the first two books, for they are the heart of the thing, and they are arranged with a care that is worth admiring slowly. The ordering follows a plan that the physicians of the ancient world had settled on long before, and that medieval healers inherited from them without question, because it worked. The remedies are set out from the head downward, beginning at the crown and moving, chapter by chapter, all the way to the soles of the feet. The old physicians had a phrase for it in Latin, a capite ad calcem, from the head to the heel, and it shaped medical books for well over 1,000 years. To read such a book from front to back is to take a slow, orderly walk down the whole length of the human body. So the first book opens with the head, and with all its many troubles. There are remedies for pains of the head and for the hair, salves for sore and running eyes, drops and washes for the ears, cures for the nose, for the mouth and the tongue, and the aching tooth, for the throat that will not swallow. And then, chapter following chapter, the book moves downward to the neck and shoulders, the chest and the lungs and the laboring heart, the stomach and its many complaints, the liver and the spleen, and on down patiently, through the lower body to the legs, and at last the feet. Nothing is hurried. Each region of the body is given its turn, and its troubles are gathered together where a reader would think to look for them. It helps to picture what a reader actually meets, chapter by chapter, along that downward walk. Near the top of the book stand the remedies for the head, for the shooting pain of it, and for the scaly, itching scalp, with betony and other bitter herbs pounded and laid on. Then come the eyes, with their salves and their gentle washes, for the eye grown red and sore and weeping. Then the ears, into which a warmed oil might be dropped for the ache that keeps a child crying through the night. Then the mouth and the gums and the loosening tooth, and the throat that has swollen and will not let food pass. Each of these has its own short gathering of cures, one after another, before the book ever descends to the chest below. Each single remedy, when you reach it, is set down in much the same plain shape. First the trouble is named, briefly and without fuss, a pain here, a swelling there, a flux, a fever. Then comes the doing of it. Take this herb and that, the book says, pound them so, or steep them so, or seethe them in butter or in ale, and give the draught to drink, or lay the salve upon the place, or bind the poultice on. It is the shape of a recipe, and it reads like one, the shape of a thing meant to be followed by busy hands rather than pondered by an idle mind. There is rarely any long explaining of why a cure should work. The book assumes you want to know what to do and tells you and moves on to the next. There is a plain wisdom in this whole arrangement that anyone who has ever hunted through a badly ordered book will feel at once. A leech called to a man with an aching tooth did not want to read the whole of medicine to find his answer. He wanted to turn to the part of the book that dealt with the mouth and find there, gathered together, the several things that had been known to help. The head, to heal order, gave him a map he could hold in his mind without effort, because it was the map of the body itself, the one thing every healer already knew by heart. That map was made easier still by the lists of chapters set at the head of each book, the plain catalogue of contents we noticed earlier. A finger run down that list would find the trouble named, with its number, and the reader could turn straight to it. It is a humble piece of craft. This pairing of an orderly arrangement with a clear table of contents, and yet it is exactly the craft that makes a reference book usable at all. The people who made this book had thought carefully about the person who would one day need it in a hurry, and they had done what they could to help him. The order served the learner as much as the practiced healer. An apprentice coming new to the craft could take the book in hand and walk down it from the head, and in doing so walk down the whole body of his art in a sequence he could not easily muddle, each region leading to the next as naturally as his own frame led from crown to foot. He learned the troubles of the head before those of the chest, and the chest before the belly, not because they came in that order in life, for illness keeps no such tidy sequence, but because the body itself gave the lesson its shape. To learn medicine from such a book was to hang the whole of it upon the familiar frame of the body, the one map every student already carried within and could never lose. The two books differ, though, in more than the region of the body they treat, and the difference is quietly telling. The first book deals, for the most part, with the outward and visible troubles, the ones a healer could see and reach and treat from the outside, wounds and sores and swellings, the eyes and the skin, the hurts of the surface of the body. The second book turns inward, to the hidden troubles of the inner organs, the fevers and the fluxes and the complaints of digestion, the things that could not be seen but only reasoned about. And as it turns inward, the book grows, in a way, more learned. The second book leans more heavily on the older classical medicine, on the reasoning of the Greek and Latin physicians, and it is here, among the inner ailments, that the remedies said to have come from the Patriarch of Jerusalem are set down. So the shape of the whole is not only a walk down the body, but a slow deepening of the medicine itself. From the plain and practical treatment of the surface to the more thoughtful, more bookish handling of the body's hidden workings. It is as though the book begins with what any careful person might learn to do with their hands, and moves gradually toward what only a reader of the old authorities could hope to understand. And through it all runs that steady downward order, head to heel, holding the whole great mass of remedies in a shape a single mind could keep. The book is not small either, for all that its leaves are few. Across its 2 parts it gathers a great many chapters, and within those chapters a still greater number of separate remedies, so that a single common trouble might be met by 3 or 4 or half a dozen different cures set down one after another, each drawn perhaps from a different source, each offered as a thing that had been known to help. A healer could try the first, and if it did not answer, turn to the next, and the next, working through the choices the book laid before him. There is a kind of generosity in that, a sense of many gathered voices each offering what they knew, rather than a single stern authority insisting on one way alone. By the time the book reaches the legs and the feet, near the end of its long descent, it has walked the reader down the whole of the body, and the troubles gathered there are the homely ones of a life spent on foot, the aching legs, the swollen feet, the sores and chilblains of cold and hard use. There is something fitting in ending the great downward journey here, at the feet, the part of us that meets the ground, the part most worn by the ordinary walking of a life. The book that began at the crown of the head closes its long anatomy at the sole of the foot, having missed, along the way, almost nothing of the body it set out so patiently to cover. There is something restful in that orderliness, I think, when you consider it from a distance of 1,000 years. The world these people lived in was uncertain and often frightening, full of illnesses they could not explain and could not always mend. But here, in the shape of this book at least, they had made something calm and orderly, a place where every trouble had its known location and its gathered answers, where you always knew where to begin. The order of the book was itself a kind of comfort, a small piece of steadiness set against a great deal of fear. And perhaps that is part of why it reassured so many hands that reached for it in the dark. Let us turn now to a part of the healer's work that the book treats plainly and without flinching, the use of the knife and the fire in the careful hands of the leech. We should not imagine that Anglo-Saxon medicine was all gentle salves and steeped herbs. The great mass of it was, and that is where its true strength lay. But the Leechbook does not shrink from the harder work either, and here and there among its pages it turns, plainly and without drama, to the times when a healer had to cut or to burn in order to help. These passages are set down in the same calm, practical voice as everything else, as one more thing a leech might need to know, and they are worth meeting in that same calm spirit tonight. The oldest and most trusted of these harder remedies was the cautery, the use of a heated iron laid against the flesh. It sounds fearsome to us, and it was surely no small thing to endure, but it had real uses that a healer of that age had few other ways to meet. A hot iron could seal a wound that would not stop bleeding, closing the vessels by its heat, where nothing else would serve. It could be used against certain growths and sores, burning away what was diseased. The technique was ancient, known to the Greek and the Roman physicians, and it passed into the Leechbook as a settled part of the craft, to be used with judgment when the gentler ways had failed or would clearly not be enough. The tools of this harder work were few and plain, and a leech kept them, we may suppose, with the same care he gave his book. A small sharp knife or two, of iron, honed to a fine edge. The cautery irons themselves, of different shapes for different uses, heated in the fire until they glowed. A slender probe for searching a wound, clothes for binding, and a supply of the salves and powders that would dress the place afterward. These were not the gleaming instruments of a later age, but they were kept clean in their fashion and used with a practiced hand, and a good leech knew each of them as a craftsman knows the tools of his trade. The knife had its place as well, chiefly for the opening of things that needed to be opened. An abscess or a gathered swelling, ripe and painful, could be lanced with a clean blade to let out the matter within, and the relief of that was immediate and real. The book gives instruction, too, for the graver work, for the cutting away of flesh that had died and blackened. The healer told to cut back, as far as the living, sound flesh, so that the deadness should not spread further into the body. Even the removal of a limb past saving is touched on, set down plainly as a thing that might, in the worst case, have to be done. There is no relish in any of it, and no fear either. It is simply written down as knowledge a healer might one day need and be glad to have. The setting of a broken bone was among the more hopeful of these harder tasks, for a well-set bone would knit and hold, and a person crippled by a bad break might, with skill, be made whole again. The leech felt the break, drew the bone straight, and bound it firm with splints of wood and wrapping, sometimes stiffened with a paste that dried hard about the limb to hold it while it mended. It asked a good eye and a sure hand, and a fair knowledge of how the bones lay beneath the skin, and a leech who could set a limb well was valued highly in a world where a lasting lameness might mean a life of hardship. Here the knife stayed sheathed, and the healing was all in the careful hands. There were quieter surgical kindnesses too, easy to overlook among the graver ones. The book gives directions for the mending of a lip that was cleft from birth, the edges pared and drawn together and salved until they knit, a small repair that could change the whole course of a child's life. Broken bones were set and splinted and bound. Dislocations were eased back into place. These were the everyday repairs of a world full of hard physical labor and frequent small accidents, the falls from carts and ladders, the kicks of animals, the mishaps of the field and the workshop, and a good leech was expected to handle them with a steady and practiced hand. What the book could not offer, and what we should remember before we judge any of it, was any true way to put a patient to sleep against the pain. There was no deep and certain anesthesia in that age, only the dulling comfort of certain strong and sleepy herbs, poppy and henbane and their like, given to soften the edge of what had to be done. A person facing the knife or the iron faced it, for the most part, awake, steadied by those who held them and by whatever the leech could give to blunt the worst of it. It asked a real courage of the patient and a real steadiness of the healer, and the plainness with which the book sets down these procedures should not fool us into thinking they were easy for anyone involved. Much of the leech skill, in truth, lay in knowing when not to use the knife or the iron at all. The book, for all that it sets down these grave procedures, is plainly the work of people who reached for them last, and not first, who tried the salve and the poultice and the herb. Drink before ever they tried the blade. A wise healer understood that cutting was a hard road, painful and dangerous, and that many troubles which seemed to call for it would in fact mend more gently if given time and care. That judgment, the weighing of when to wait and when to act, was among the hardest parts of the whole craft, and no book could ever quite teach it. It came only with years, and with the memory of cases gone both well and badly, carried quietly in the healer's own experience. Such skills were passed, like all the rest of the craft, from an older healer to a younger, learned by watching, and then by careful doing under a watchful eye. A young leech did not open a book and set out to cut. He stood at his master's shoulder, through case after case, handed the tools, watched the hands, and only slowly, over years, took up the harder work himself. It was the safest way to learn a thing so grave, and it meant that the knowledge of the knife and the iron, like the knowledge of the herb and the charm, lived less in the written page than in the long, patient handing on of one healer's experience to the next. It should be said that such cutting and burning were rare events, set against the daily flow of gentler remedies, and a healer might go long stretches without ever reaching for the iron at all. The great mass of his work was herbs and salves and quiet counsel. The knife came out for the grave case alone, the abscess ripe to bursting, the wound that would not stop its bleeding, the flesh already lost, and even then it came out reluctantly. We should not picture the leech as a ready cutter, eager with his blade. We should picture him rather as a man who kept these hard tools clean and ready against the day he might need them, and hoped, most days, that he would not. When the moment did come, though, he met it, for the whole worth of keeping such knowledge lay in being ready on the rare day it was truly needed, and a healer who flinched from it when it came was of little use to anyone. That quiet readiness, held against a day that might never arrive, was itself part of the burden of the craft. And yet there is a kind of quiet dignity in these passages, for all their hardness. The leech did what could be done with what he had. He knew the limits of his craft, and the book is honest about them, naming the cases where cutting was the only hope, and the cases, too, where nothing would serve. Set beside the salves and the herb drinks, this harder knowledge rounds out the picture of the healer as someone who met the whole range of human hurt, from a child's earach to a labourer's shattered leg, and did, in each case, the most careful thing he knew. It is not a small thing to have been that person in that world, and the book that guided his hands treats even its gravest instructions with the same unhurried, steadying calm. We will turn now to the deeper question of where all this gathered knowledge actually came from, and to the two very different worlds of medicine that meet and mingle within this single English book. When you read Bold's Leechbook closely, you begin to notice that two very different kinds of medicine are living together within it, side by side, on the same pages, in the same calm voice. There is a learned southern medicine, the inheritance of the great physicians of the ancient Mediterranean world. And there is a homely northern medicine, the herb, lore and healing custom of the Germanic and British peoples themselves. the book does not set these two at war. It folds them quietly together, and the folding is one of the most remarkable things about it. The southern strand runs back, through many hands, to the physicians of Greece and of the later Roman and Byzantine world. Their knowledge reached England, not directly but through Latin, in the medical books that the Church carried north along with its scriptures. Behind many of the Leechbook's remedies, especially in its more learned second part, stand the great authorities of that older world, physicians whose names meant little in an English village, but whose reasoning had shaped medicine for centuries. Their careful observations on the body, their catalogues of herbs and their virtues, their whole ordered way of thinking about illness, all of this had travelled the long road to England and lay ready to be drawn upon. Some of these authorities are worth naming softly, though there is no need to remember them. There was a physician of the Eastern Mediterranean whose writings on the treatment of illness were copied and prized for centuries, and whose remedies echo through the Leechbook's inner pages. There were the old catalogues of plants and their uses, gathered first in the Greek world and translated onward, that told a healer what each herb was good for. And behind them all stood the vast, rambling natural lore of the Roman encyclopedists, who had written down everything they could learn of the world, plants and animals and stones, and their supposed powers, in great books that the medieval age mined like quarries for whatever seemed useful. The northern strand is harder to trace to any book, because for the most part it lived in no book at all. It was the accumulated herb, knowledge of the English countryside itself, the lore of which plant grew where, and when to gather it, and what it eased, carried in memory and in speech, and in daily practice long before anyone wrote it down. It is this strand that gives the Leechbook its particular flavour, its English plants and English ways, its charms and its elf lore, all the things a purely classical medical book would never contain. When we read of whey bread gathered by the path, or of a salve worked in butter and laid on by a fire, or of words spoken over a wound, we are hearing the native voice, the home-grown medicine of the land itself. What makes the book so much more than a translation is the way these two strands are woven. The compiler did not simply copy a foreign text and set it down whole. He chose. He took from the southern learning what seemed useful and true, and he set it beside the home knowledge he already trusted. And where the foreign recipe called for something that did not grow or could not be got in England, he reached, sensibly, for an English plant that might serve the same turn. The book is the work of a mind sifting two inheritances and keeping the best of both, a genuine act of judgment rather than mere copying. That sifting matters because it tells us these were not people simply in awe of the ancient authorities, swallowing whatever the old book said. They respected the classical learning, certainly, and drew on it gladly. But they measured it against their own experience and their own conditions, and they were willing to adapt it, to substitute, to leave out what would not serve. There is a quiet confidence in that, the confidence of practical people who knew their own herbs and their own patients, and were not going to be told otherwise by a book, however venerable. That had been written for a warmer country and a different world. A single example, softly told, shows how this substitution worked in practice. A remedy inherited from the warm south might call for a plant that flourished around the Mediterranean but sulked or died in the cold English rain. Rather than abandon the cure, a sensible compiler would look to the English hedgerow for a plant of like nature, one reckoned to share the same qualities of heat or cold, moisture or dryness, and put it in the foreign herb's place. In this quiet way the medicine of a sunlit country was made to grow, as it were, in an English garden, translated not only from one language to another, but from one climate and one soil to another entirely. It is a small thing, but it shows a mind at work, adapting rather than merely copying. We can catch a glimpse, too, of how the southern learning ever reached the north at all. It came with the church, above all. When Christianity was brought to the English, it brought books with it, and among those books were medical ones, carried by scholars and monks who valued the healing arts as part of a Christian care for the whole person. Great centers of learning grew up where such men gathered, schools where the old languages were taught and the old texts copied. And from these the medical knowledge spread outward, copy by copy, into houses and libraries across the land, until in time it reached the hands that made our book. There had been such a school in the far south of England, generations before the Leechbook was made, gathered around teachers who had come from the eastern Mediterranean itself, bringing with them a deep learning in the old tongues and the old sciences, medicine among them. Students who studied there carried what they had learned back to their own houses across the country, and the books they copied and the knowledge they taught seeded libraries far and wide. It was along quiet channels such as these, from teacher to student, from one copied book to the next, that the medicine of the ancient world made its slow way into the English tongue and the English mind, arriving at last, much handled and much adapted, in a working manual like Bald's. Each copying was a chance for loss and a chance for gain. A remedy might be garbled by a tired scribe, or quietly improved by a thoughtful one, or adapted to fit what actually grew nearby. By the time a cure had passed through many such hands, it was rarely quite what it had first been, and it was often the better for it, tested and reshaped along the way. The book we read is the far end of a very long chain of such small changes, each link a person doing their best with what had reached them. There is a quiet labor hidden in all this gathering that is easy to pass over. Someone had to read widely in the older books, in a language not his own, understand what he read, judge it worth the keeping, and set it down afresh in English, choosing his words to carry the meaning true. That is translation, and translation is never a simple copying. It is a kind of rebuilding, a taking apart of one tongue's meaning and a making of it again in another, and every remedy that came from the south into this English book passed through that patient, invisible work. We owe a great deal, in reading it, to nameless people who once bent over a foreign page and asked themselves, slowly, what it truly said and how an Englishman might best be told. So the Leechbook is, in a real sense, a meeting place. Two rivers of knowledge, one from the sunlit south and one from the misty north, one written and one spoken, one ancient and grand and one homely and near, flow together within its covers and mingle, until you can hardly tell, in places, which is which. A remedy may open with the authority of a Greek physician, and close with a charm from an English hedgerow, and the book sets them down together, untroubled, as though there had never been any distance between them at all. There is something in that mingling that feels true to how knowledge really moves in the world when we are honest about it. It is rarely pure. It rarely comes from one place alone. It gathers and borrows and adapts and carries forward whatever has been found to work, from wherever it was found. And by the time it reaches any one pair of hands, it has usually traveled further and gathered more than anyone remembers. The Leechbook wears that mingled history openly and is the richer for it. A book of many voices speaking, at last, in a single quiet English tongue. Let us turn now to the great old theory of the body that underlay so much of the Southern learning, the theory of the Four Humours, and to the calm, balanced picture of health that it offered to the medieval mind. For the best part of 2,000 years, healers across the Western world understood the body in terms of four fluids, or humours, that were thought to flow within it. There was the blood and the phlegm, and two kinds of bile, the yellow and the black. Health, in this understanding, was a matter of balance among these four. When they were in their right proportion, each present in its proper measure, the body was well. When one grew too strong or too weak, when the balance was thrown out, illness followed. Almost the whole aim of medicine, in this view, was to restore the balance that had been lost. Each of the four humours was bound up with a pair of qualities, and here the theory reached out to embrace the whole of nature. Blood was held to be warm and moist, phlegm cold and moist, yellow bile warm and dry, black bile cold and dry. These same pairings of hot and cold, moist and dry, were seen to run through everything, through the four elements of earth and water, air and fire, through the four seasons of the turning year, through the very ages of a human life, from the warm moist springtime of childhood to the cold dry winter of old age. It was a vision of the body knit into the whole fabric of the world, answering to the same rhythms as the seasons and the stars. The theory even reached into character, into the very temper of a person, and there it has left words we still use without thinking. A person in whom blood ran strong was sanguine, warm and cheerful and quick. One ruled by phlegm was phlegmatic, calm and slow and steady. One with an excess of yellow bile was choleric, quick to anger. One weighed down by black bile was melancholy, thoughtful and sad. To this day we speak of a person's humour, of being in good humour or ill, and we scarcely notice that we are using the old physician's word for the fluids they believed shaped the whole of who we are. People understood themselves through this scheme as much as they understood their illnesses. A person came to know their own nature as leaning one way or another, warmer or cooler, quicker or slower, and to expect certain troubles to visit them more than others because of it. The theory offered, in this way, not only a medicine, but a whole gentle account of why people differed, why one neighbour was merry and another grave, why one took a fever readily and another rarely, why the same season that lifted one spirit weighed heavily on another. It was a way of making sense of the endless variety of people, and of forgiving it, for a man could hardly be blamed for a temper that flowed, as it were, in his very fluids. The old physician spoke, too, of the things a person must manage to keep their balance, the ordinary matters of daily living that could tip the humours one way or the other. There was the air one breathed, and the place one dwelt. There was food and drink, the greatest lever of all. There was sleep and waking, and the balance between them. There was motion and rest, labor and ease. There was the proper clearing of the body of its wastes. And there were the passions of the mind, the joys and griefs and angers and fears, which were held to act upon the body as surely as any food or physic. To keep well was to keep all of these in a temperate middle way, and much of the healer's counsel was simply the wise ordering of an everyday life. In practice, the theory told a healer what to do by telling him what had gone wrong. If an illness was judged to come from an excess of some humor, the cure was to draw that excess off, or to counter it with its opposite. A body thought to hold too much blood might be relieved by drawing a little of it away. A disease reckoned cold and wet might be met with herbs and foods reckoned warm and dry to restore the balance from the other side. Every herb, every food, every remedy could in principle be placed somewhere on that grid of hot and cold, moist and dry, and chosen to answer the trouble at hand. It gave the whole of treatment a reasoned shape, a why behind the what. This is where the drawing of blood found its place, that practice so bound up in our minds with old medicine. To let a measured amount of blood was thought to ease many troubles by reducing a supposed excess and restoring the balance of the humours. And it was done not carelessly, but by careful rule. There were held to be right times and wrong times for it, governed by the season of the year, by the age and strength of the patient, and even by the phase of the moon and the position of the heavens. Certain days were marked as ill, omened for the letting of blood, and a prudent healer kept account of them. This is why the old title given to these medical writings speaks not only of leechdoms and wort cunning, the cures and the plant lore, but of starcraft too, the reading of the heavens, for the three were understood to belong together. There was a grander idea folded into all of this too, that a person found comforting in its way. The body was seen as a small world, a little echo of the great world outside it, made of the same four elements, moved by the same four qualities, turning through the same rhythms of warmth and cold, wet and dry, that govern the seasons and the tides and the wheeling of the heavens. To fall ill was to fall out of tune with that larger order, and to be healed was to be brought back into it. There is a beauty in that picture, whatever its truth, a sense of the suffering body, not as a broken machine, but as a small instrument gone briefly out of harmony with a vast and patient music, and needing only to be tuned again. The turning of the year had its own place in all this, governing when certain treatments were thought best given. Spring, warm and moist like the blood itself, was held a favourable season for the drawing of blood, the body then most full of it, and the old calendars marked the months, and even the particular days reckoned good or ill for the letting. A careful healer kept such timings in mind, choosing his season, avoiding the days held unlucky, aligning his treatment with the great slow rhythms of the year. It bound the small act of healing into the vast turning of the seasons, and gave even the humblest remedy a place within a larger order, which was itself, to the medieval mind, a quiet reassurance. It should be said that Bald's Leechbook is more a book of practice than a book of theory, and it does not linger long over the humours in the abstract. It is far more interested in telling a healer what to do than in explaining the philosophy behind it. But the humoral understanding is there, underneath, the quiet framework within which all its remedies made sense, surfacing openly in its guidance on the timing of bloodletting and the balancing of the body. The theory was simply the water these healers swam in, so familiar it hardly needed stating. It is worth noticing how completely this way of thinking soaked into ordinary life, far beyond the sick room. People chose their food with an eye to its supposed heat or cold. They judged the seasons, and dressed and ate and rested by them. They read their own moods and their neighbours' as the work of the fluids within, and forgave or blamed accordingly. The theory of the humours was not only a physician's tool, but a whole shared language for the body and the self, spoken by everyone, learned in childhood, and taken as simply the way things were. That is part of why it lasted so long. It was not merely believed, it was lived. Whatever we now make of it, and modern medicine has long since set it aside, there was a deep and human appeal in the theory of the humours, and it is not hard to feel why it held on for so many centuries. It made illness intelligible. It placed the suffering body within a larger order, tied to the seasons and the elements and the stars, part of a balanced and comprehensible whole. And it preached, above all, moderation and balance, the avoidance of excess, the keeping of a steady middle way in food and drink and feeling. That at least was wisdom, whatever the fluids beneath it, and it is advice a healer of any age might still, in its gentler form, be glad to give. We will turn now from the theory of balance to one of its most everyday and comforting expressions: the belief that the right food and the right drink were themselves among the surest medicines a household possessed. In the world that made this book, there was no clear wall between the kitchen and the medicine chest. The same hearth that cooked the family's supper brewed the sick person's draught. The same pot, the same herbs, the same butter and all and honey served both the well and the ailing, and the line between food and physic was not a wall at all but a soft and shifting border that a wise householder crossed a dozen times a day without ever quite noticing. To feed the sick rightly was, in itself, among the surest medicines anyone possessed. This flowed naturally from the older understanding of the body, in which what a person ate was among the great levers of their health. Food was reckoned, like every herb, to carry its own qualities of warmth or cold, moisture or dryness, and to nudge the body's balance one way or another. A person recovering from a chill and wet illness might be given warming, drying foods to help set them right, and a person burning with fever cooling and moistening ones. The choosing of the sick person's diet was thus a real part of the healer's craft, as much thought over as any salve, and a good leech gave careful counsel on what should and should not be eaten while the trouble ran its course. The commonest of all sick room foods was a simple broth or thin gruel, and its virtues were real. When a person was too weak or too sick to face solid food, a warm, light, easily swallowed pottage of grain seethed soft, or a broth in which healing herbs had been simmered, could carry both nourishment and medicine together into a failing body. The herbs gave up their virtue into the warm liquid. The grain gave strength, and the warmth itself was a comfort. Many a person too ill to be helped any other way could still be coaxed to take a few spoonfuls of a warm broth and be the better for it. The names of these sick room dishes have a plain and comforting sound. There was a thin gruel of barley or of oats, seethed long and soft until a weak stomach could bear it. There was a broth in which a leek or two had been simmered, for the leek was reckoned both food and physic, and sat gently on the sick. There was bread soaked in warm milk, or all for those who could chew little, and eggs beaten into a warm drink for those who needed building up. None of it was grand, and none of it was meant to be. It was the plain, soft, warming fare that a weak body could take and be strengthened by, and the making of it was among the first kindnesses a household offered anyone who fell ill beneath its roof. Then there were the warm, thickened, spiced drinks that the sick and the weary were given, drinks that sat somewhere between a food and a medicine and were prized as both. A draught of warmed ale or wine, thickened with egg or with soft bread, sweetened with honey and warmed through with spices, was reckoned a great restorer of strength, given to invalids, to the old, to women worn out with childbirth, to anyone who needed building up. It was easy to swallow, gentle on a weak stomach, and warming through and through, and the small comfort of a warm, sweet drink pressed into the hands of a sick person is one that no age has ever really improved upon. All itself deserves a word, for it ran through the whole of this medicine as water runs through ours. In a world where plain water was often unsafe to drink, the household ale, brewed weak and drunk daily by young and old alike, was both the ordinary drink and a common base for medicine. A great many of the Leechbook's draughts are to be given in ale, the herbs steeped or seethed in it, so that the patient took their cure in the same wholesome, familiar drink they knew from every meal. Wine, rarer and dearer, served the same turn for the stronger and more precious remedies, and milk, warm from the beast, carried the gentler ones, especially those meant for children. Butter, too, was as much a medicine as a food. Fresh butter, and especially butter made in May, when the beasts fed on the young spring grass, was prized as a base for salves, the healing herbs pounded into it, and the whole worked smooth and spread upon the skin. Taken by mouth, it was thought soothing to the inward parts, and a spoonful of butter was a common enough remedy in its own right for certain troubles of the chest and throat. The plain, rich, everyday foods of the dairy were thus quietly medicinal, and a household with good milk, good butter, and good honey held a fair part of its medicine chest already in its larder. Honey ran through everything, sweetening the bitter draughts, binding the salves, and healing in its own right, though it deserves and will have its own fuller place later in our evening. For now it is enough to notice how it belongs to this same soft country between food and physic, a thing spread on bread at breakfast and pressed into a wound in the afternoon, without the least sense that these were different kinds of act. The sweet and the healing were, in honey, the very same thing. There was a place, too, for taking food away, as well as giving it. For certain troubles, and especially for fevers, the old wisdom often counseled a lightening of the diet, a turning away from heavy meats and rich fare toward thin broths, simple gruels, and rest. To rest the body's digestion while it fought an illness was thought to help it, and there is a plain sense in that, in not burdening a sick person with more than they can bear. For the feverish, above all, drink mattered more than food, and the giving of cool, mild drinks to someone burning with fever was among the plainest and most helpful things a nurse could do. A thin barley water, a weak infusion of cooling herbs, a little wine well watered, offered often and in small sips, kept the sufferer from drying out through the long heat of the fever, though no one then would have put it in those words. They only knew that a feverish person craved drink, and that giving it, patiently, sip after small sip, seemed to carry them through. It was simple care, and it was sound, and it eased more fevers than any charm ever did. The healer's counsel, then, was as often about what not to eat as about what to eat, a paring back of the daily fare to something the ailing body could manage. The return to ordinary food was itself managed with care, and not hurried. A person coming up out of a long illness was not set at once before a full board, but led back gently, from the thin broth to the thicker, from the gruel to the soft bread, from the light drink to the fuller, as the body found its strength again. To feed a weak stomach too much too soon was known to undo a whole recovery, and a wise nurse held her patient back, even as they began to hunger, giving a little, and then a little more, until the appetite could be trusted once again. It was a patient art, this leading of the body back to its own table, and one that any good household kept without needing to be told. All of this rested, in the end, on the good sense and long experience of the person who kept the household, most often the good wife, who knew without any book when her family needed feeding up, and when they needed a lighter hand, when a warm posset would set a shivering child right, and when only rest and a thin broth would serve. She crossed that soft border between kitchen and sick room so often that she scarcely knew it was there, reaching for the honey jar and the herb bundle, and the owl crock with the same untroubled ease, and it was in her ordinary daily care, quite as much as in any Leechbook, that the medicine of food truly lived. Picture the sick room itself, for it is the true setting of all this quiet medicine. A low chamber, a fire kept steady on the hearth, a pot of something warm and simple set close beside it, the sick person wrapped and resting, and someone near at hand, a wife, a mother, a daughter, watching the fire and the pot and the patient all at once, dipping a spoon, testing the warmth of a drink against her own wrist before she offers it. There is no drama in the scene, only patience and warmth, and the small steady acts of feeding and tending that have comforted the sick in every age. The medicine of food was, above all, a medicine of presence, given by someone who stayed. There is a great gentleness in this whole strand of the old healing, and a wisdom that has never really been overturned. To feed a sick person warmly and lightly, to press a hot sweet drink into their hands, to sit with them while they take a little broth, these are among the oldest kindnesses there are, and they comfort still in every home whenever someone is unwell. The particular theories have changed, but the warm bowl and the warm drink have not, and there is a thread running unbroken from that Anglo-Saxon hearth to any kitchen where someone, tonight, is warming something gentle for a person they love who is ill. Let us turn now to the green heart of the whole book, to the herbs themselves, the plants that a leech gathered and dried, and pounded and steeped, and that carried the greater part of all his healing. For all its charms and its cautery, its humours and its warm broths, Bald's Leechbook is, at its heart, a book of herbs. The overwhelming mass of its remedies turn, sooner or later, on some plant, gathered from the garden or the hedgerow, prepared in one of a few settled ways, and given to the sick. To know the herbs, their names and their places and their virtues, was the very ground of the healer's craft, and it is worth walking slowly tonight among a few of the plants the book most trusted. First among them, by long tradition, stood Beatony, a modest plant of the woodland edge and the shady bank, with its spike of soft purple flowers. It was held in extraordinary regard, credited with virtue against a great host of troubles, from pains of the head to disorders of the stomach, from bites to bad dreams. A companion herb, book of the same age, opens its whole account of plants with Bethany, listing use after use after use, as though no other herb quite deserved to go first. Whether it truly did all that was claimed for, it hardly mattered to the esteem in which it was held. Bethany was the healer's old reliable friend, reached for first and trusted deeply, planted near at hand and never in short supply. Beside it we must set waybread, the plant we now call plantain, the tough, low, broad-leaved herb that grows along every trodden path and field edge, so common that most people walk over it without a glance. To the leech it was precious. Its leaves, bruised and laid on, were among the first things reached for on a wound, a sting, a bite, or a sore, and it was believed to draw out what was harmful and to help the flesh knit clean. It is one of those plants whose very toughness, its habit of thriving exactly where it is most trodden underfoot, seems to have been read as a kind of virtue, a herb that survived all hardship and might help the body do the same. Mugwort held a place of its own, a tall, grey-green herb of waysides and waste ground, wrapped in a deep and ancient reputation. It was reckoned among the very oldest and most powerful of the healing plants, carried by travellers against weariness on the road, given for the troubles particular to women, and held to have a protective power beyond its plain medicine. We will meet it again later in the night, when we come to a certain famous old charm in which it is named first of all the herbs. But here it is enough to know that mugwort stood high among the plants the leech most respected, half medicine and half something older and stranger still. Then there were the many humbler workhorses of the herb shelf, each with its settled uses. Wormwood, bitter beyond almost any other plant, was given against the worms that troubled the belly and to settle a sour and sickly stomach. Fennel, sweet and feathery, was used for the eyes, for the digestion, and for the wind that griped a child. Rue, sharp and blue-green, was a wound herb and a guard against ill air. Agrimony, celandine, wood sage, vervain, and a dozen more each had their place, gathered in their season and stored against the year's needs. The whole green alphabet of the healer's trade. The old names of these herbs are half the pleasure of them, and worth speaking slowly for their own sake. There was feltwort, soft and woolly of leaf. The plant we now call millen, its tall stalk once dipped in fat to make a rushlight, and its leaves given for the troubled chest. There was ribwort, a narrow cousin of the waybread, and horehound for the cough, and the small bright flower called eyebright, kept for the very eyes it was named to help. Each carried its use half folded into its name, so that to learn the names was already to begin learning the medicine, and a child growing up in such a household soaked up a great deal of it, simply by hearing the plants called each day by their old and telling names. These plants came from every kind of ground, and part of the leech's knowledge was simply knowing where each one grew. Some were tended in the garden close by the door, the ones most used and most wanted near at hand. Others were gathered wild from the hedgerow, the wayside, the damp ditch, the sunny bank, the shaded wood. Each plant sought in the place it favoured. To gather well was a skill in itself, knowing not only the plant, but its haunts, its season, the part to be taken, and the right way to dry and keep it, so that its virtue should not be lost between the gathering and the hour of need. Once gathered, the herbs were prepared in a few plain and well-worn ways that run through the whole book. A herb might be pounded fresh and laid directly on the skin. It might be steeped in hot water, ale, wine, or milk to make a drink. It might be seethed in butter or in fat and worked into a salve. It might be dried and powdered for keeping. These few simple methods, used over and over in endless combinations, were the whole practical grammar of the herbal medicine, and a leech knew them so well that the reading of a remedy and the making of it were almost a single act. A great deal of the leech's year was given over to the drying and the keeping of herbs against the seasons when nothing grew. Bunches were hung head downward from the beams of a loft or a shed in the shade and the moving air until the leaves were dry and crisp and could be crumbled and stored. Roots were dug in their proper season, cleaned and dried whole or in slices. Seeds were gathered and kept in twists of cloth or in small pots. All through the summer and the autumn the healer laid up this quiet harvest, so that in the deep of winter, when a fever came and no green thing stood in the frozen hedgerow, there would still be botany and mugwort and waybread waiting, dried but potent, upon the shelf. The gathering was only half the work. The keeping was the other half, and the more patient of the two. Part of the leech's knowledge was also of the plants to leave alone, or to handle with the greatest care. Some of the most powerful herbs were also the most dangerous, their virtue and their venom lying very close together, so that the same plant might heal in the smallest dose and harm in a larger one. The leech learned these especially well, which to touch and which to shun, how much was medicine, and how much was already too much. For a healer who did not know the dangerous plants as surely as the safe ones was no healer at all. This careful knowing of the fine edge between cure and harm was among the gravest parts of the whole craft, carried quietly and passed on to an apprentice with particular care. What lingers, when you sit with this green heart of the book, is how near it all still is. Many of these very plants grow yet, in the very places they always favored, along our paths and hedges and shady banks, most of them dismissed now as weeds by people hurrying past. Waybread is still underfoot on every trodden path. Beatany still flowers on the woodland edge. The knowledge has thinned and faded, but the plants themselves have not gone anywhere, and there is a quiet comfort in that, in knowing that the green medicine of the Leechbook is not truly lost, but only overlooked, still growing patiently, exactly where it always did. We will turn now to the single most famous page in the whole book, a plain little recipe for a salve to soothe a sore eye, and to the strange and quiet way it came, 1,000 years on, to be brewed again. Among the remedies for the eyes, near the top of the book where the troubles of the head are gathered, there sits a short and unremarkable-looking recipe. It is a salve meant for a wen upon the eye, a swelling or a gathering of the kind we might now call a stye, an infected and painful lump on the lid. The recipe is set down as plainly as any of its neighbours, in a few brief lines, and for the greater part of 1,000 years no one thought it in any way special. It has become, in our own age, the single most famous page in the whole book, and it is worth reading slowly, exactly as it stands. Take garlic, the recipe says, and another herb of the onion kind, and pound them together. Take wine and the gall of an ox, that is the bile from the creature's own body, and mix these with the pounded herbs. Put the whole into a vessel of brass, and let it stand for 9 nights. Then strain it through a cloth, and use it upon the eye. That is the whole of it. Garlic and its cousin, wine and oxgall, brass and 9 nights of waiting, and a cloth to strain it clean. A kitchen's worth of homely things, gathered and mixed and set aside to steep in a recipe 1,000 years old. It is worth holding on to what the salve was actually for, beneath all its later fame. It was a remedy for a sore eye, a common, painful, everyday trouble, the kind of small affliction that has bothered people in every age and asks only to be eased. A leech mixing, it was not thinking of superbugs or laboratories, of course, but of some neighbor come to his door with a red and swollen eyelid, wanting relief. That is the humble truth at the root of it, and it is worth keeping in view. The remedy that would one day astonish a modern laboratory began, and was used for centuries, as nothing grander than a gentle answer to a sore and weeping eye. For most of the centuries since, a learned person reading that recipe would have smiled, gently or not, and set it down as superstition. It has the look of exactly the kind of thing we were long taught to expect from the medicine of that age. A jumble of odd ingredients and magic numbers, garlic and gall and the mystical 9 nights. More charm than physic. It seemed to belong to a world of credulous belief that later, wiser ages had thankfully left behind. And so it sat unregarded on its old page for a very long time. Then, in our own century, something quiet and rather wonderful happened to it. At a university in England, at Nottingham, a scholar of the old Anglo-Saxon world and a scientist who studied bacteria fell into conversation and wondered together what would happen if someone simply followed one of these old recipes exactly and tested what it made. They chose this Eye Salve. They gathered the ingredients as faithfully as they could: real garlic, a real onion kind, wine of the sort that might have been used, genuine oxgall. They mixed them in the given proportions, sealed them in brass, and let the mixture stand for its 9 nights, just as the recipe instructed, keeping close to the old method at every step. Following the recipe faithfully turned out to be harder than it sounds, and the care they took over it is part of why the result deserves to be trusted. The old words do not always tell us exactly what they mean. The onion kind the recipe names, set beside the garlic, might be read as one plant or as another, and the makers had to weigh the choice. The wine, the gall, the very brass of the vessel all had to be chosen to match, as nearly as could be managed, what an Anglo-Saxon healer would have had to hand. They were not throwing kitchen scraps together to see what might happen. They were trying, as honestly as scholarship and science together could manage, to make again the very thing the old book described, and then to let it be whatever it would be. Then they took what they had made and tested it against bacteria in the laboratory, and among the bacteria they chose was one of the hard cases of modern medicine, a strain of a common germ that has learned to resist our strongest drugs, the kind of stubborn infection that troubles hospitals today, and that our best antibiotics struggle to kill. They wanted to see whether this old salve, this 1,000-year-old kitchen remedy for a sore eye, would do anything at all to a germ that our own age finds so difficult to master. It killed it. In the careful conditions of the laboratory, the old salve, brewed just as the Leechbook said, proved able to kill the great majority of these stubborn bacteria in tests upon the kind of infected wound the germ likes to make. The result was checked and repeated, and it held. A remedy set down by an English scribe more than 1,000 years ago, dismissed for centuries as old nonsense, turned out to have a real and measurable power against a germ that had not even been given its modern name until our own lifetimes. The most curious part came when the scientists tried to understand why. They tested the ingredients one by one, the garlic alone, the onion alone, the wine, the gall, each on its own, and found that no single one of them did very much. It was only the whole mixture together, made in the full and particular way the recipe described, that carried the power. Even the 9 nights of standing seemed to matter, some change taking place slowly in the brass vessel as the ingredients steeped and mingled and worked upon one another. The old recipe was not a bag of separate remedies thrown together at random. It was a made thing, and the making was the medicine. The finding drew a good deal of quiet interest when it was made known, and more work followed after, for a result like that is not simply left to sit. Other hands took up the mixture and studied it further, trying to understand what within it did the work, and how and why the whole should so outdo its parts. That is the proper way of such things, the patient testing and retesting of a surprising result, and it goes on still, but the heart of it was already plain from the very first. An old remedy, faithfully remade, had done something real, and the doing could be measured, and it held up to being looked at hard. That, in the end, is what lifts it above a mere curiosity and makes it worth the telling. When the story of the reawakened salve reached beyond the laboratory, it caught the imagination of a great many people, and it is not hard to see why. There is something in it that speaks to a deep and pleasing hope, the hope that the past was not so foolish as we had feared, that wisdom can lie forgotten and be found again, that an old book might still hold a living secret between its leaves. It is a hope worth handling gently, for one salve does not remake a whole medicine, and the old healers got a great deal wrong besides. But the plain fact at the heart of it is real and lovely enough on its own. 1,000-year-old cure for a sore eye, remade with care and found to hold true. And it needs no adding to. It is important to hold all of this calmly, and the scientists themselves were the first to say so. This was a finding in a laboratory, upon bacteria in dishes and in models of wounds, and it is a long way from proving that a medieval leech, salving a real sore eye by candlelight, was curing dangerous infections as a modern doctor would. We cannot know how often the salve helped, or how it was truly used, or what the old healers understood themselves to be doing. It is a piece of history and of chemistry, quietly astonishing in its way, and it is not, and was never meant to be, any kind of medical advice for our own troubles. It is simply a true and gentle surprise. What it invites, more than anything, is a certain humility. It is easy, looking back across 1,000 years, to feel that the people of that age knew so much less than we do, and in a great many ways they did. But here is a remedy they arrived at, most likely, through nothing but long, patient trial, one healer after another noticing what seemed to help and passing it on, with no notion at all of the bacteria we now know were the real trouble. They could not have explained why it worked. They may only have known that, often enough, it did. And that plain knowing, tested and handed down and written into a book, has reached across all those centuries and surprised us in our own laboratories. It is a good reason to be a little slower to condescend to the past. There is something to sit with, too, in the simple picture of the same salve brewed twice, 1,000 years apart. Once by a healer in an Anglo-Saxon town, pounding garlic in the firelight, pouring in the wine and the gall, setting the brass vessel aside on a shelf to wait out its 9 nights while ordinary life went on around it. And once again in our own age, in a bright laboratory of steel and glass, by people in coats measuring and testing, following those same old words. 2 brewings, 2 worlds, 1 recipe, and the same quiet power waking in the mixture both times. It is a thread of continuity as fine and as strong as any in this whole book. Let us turn now to the wider work of tending wounds, and to the golden, sticky remedy that the leech reached for again and again, and that our own age has learned, once more, to respect. The tending of wounds was among the commonest and most constant of all a leech's tasks, for the world he lived in was hard on the body. There were the cuts and gashes of tools and blades, the burns of the ever-present fire, the crushing hurts of falling timber and kicking beasts, the sores and ulcers that opened on the skin and would not close. A great part of the Leechbook is given over to the care of such hurts, and its counsel, read with a fair eye, is a mixture of the plainly sensible and the plainly mistaken, as the medicine of any age is, our own no doubt included. The general shape of wound care in the book is one a modern nurse would half recognize. The wound was to be cleaned and salved with one of the many green ointments the leech kept ready, and bound with a clean cloth, and tended until it healed. The salves themselves were worked from healing herbs, pounded into butter or fat or wax, and among the herbs chosen were several that we now know to have real virtue upon a wound. Plants that genuinely stanch bleeding, or draw tissue together, or discourage the rot that can set into torn flesh. The old healers did not know why these worked, but they knew that they did, and they reached for them by long habit. Certain herbs were reached for again and again upon a wound, and their old names carry their use plainly. There was woundwort, whose very name declares it, laid upon cuts and hurts to help them heal. There was yarrow, an old soldier's herb, pressed to a wound to stanch the flow of blood, and the tough waybread we met among the herbs, bruised and bound on to draw and to cleanse. Several of these have since been found to hold genuine virtue, to slow a bleeding, to tighten torn tissue, to hold off the spoiling of a wound, so that the leech, reaching for them by long custom, was reaching more wisely than he could have known. The plants had earned their names across generations of quiet use, and they kept faith with them. So much of a leech's life was given to hurts like these that he grew, in time, deeply skilled at them, whatever else he knew or did not. He had seen 1,000 cuts and burns and broken heads, watched which healed clean and which turned bad, learned by long looking the signs of a wound doing well and a wound doing ill. That accumulated seeing was itself a kind of knowledge no book could hold, the practiced eye that knew, almost without thinking, when a hurt could be left to mend and when it needed more. In the daily tending of the body's constant small injuries, the leech was often at his surest and his best. Many leeches kept, besides, a general green salve, an all-purpose ointment made of many wound, herbs pounded together into fat or wax, ready on the shelf for whatever hurt the day might bring. Such a salve was a small treasury of the herb, garden's healing gathered into one pot, and a leech trusted it for the ordinary run of cuts and sores that made up so much of his work. The making of a good salve was a point of quiet pride, its color deep and green, its smell sharp with the herbs of the field, and a well-made pot of it was as valued in a household as any single herb. The wound once salved was bound, and the binding mattered as much as the salve. A clean cloth, wound firmly but not too tight, held the salve in place, kept the dirt of the world out, and gave the torn flesh the stillness it needed to knit. Where the edges of a wound gaped, they might be drawn together and held, so that they should heal close and clean, rather than wide and slow. None of this was done with any knowledge of the unseen causes of a wound's spoiling, and yet much of it, the cleaning, the covering, the drawing together, the keeping still, was exactly what such a hurt truly needed, arrived at by the plain observation that wounds tended so did better than wounds left open to the world. There was a rhythm, too, to the tending of a wound that repeated itself day after day until the hurt was healed. The old dressing was gently lifted, the wound looked at and cleaned, fresh salve laid on, a clean cloth bound over, and a few quiet words spoken, and then the same again the next day, and the next. This patient returning, this refusal to leave a wound to fend for itself, was itself a large part of the healing. A hurt watched over and tended daily does better than one bound once and then forgotten, and the leech, coming back and back to the same wound, changing the same dressing, was giving it exactly the steady attention it needed to mend. Much of medicine, then as now, was simply a matter of not going away. There is a quiet heroism in that steadiness, easy to overlook because it makes no show at all. The leech who came back day after day to clean and dress a slow, healing wound, expecting no thanks and often getting none, was doing something as valuable as any dramatic cure, and a good deal harder to keep up. Constancy is its own kind of skill, and its own kind of kindness. Above all, there was honey. The leech spread honey upon wounds and sores as healers had done since the most ancient times, and here again the old practice has been quietly vindicated by our own knowledge. We now understand that honey has a real power against the germs that spoil a wound. It draws the moisture out of them and starves them, its very sweetness turned against them, and it works, besides, in other subtle ways to keep a wound clean and to help it heal. So true is this that honey, specially prepared, is used upon wounds in hospitals to this day, come back into respectable medicine after long neglect. The golden jar on the Anglo-Saxon shelf held a genuine and lasting remedy, whatever else stood beside it. Burns had their own gentle remedies, and no wonder, in a world lit and warmed and cooked by open fire, where a scald or a burn was among the commonest of all household hurts. The cool, fleshy leaf of the house leek, which grew upon the very roof, was split open and pressed to a burn to draw out its heat, and honey was laid on here too, soothing and covering the raw skin. A burn, more than most hurts, cries out for something cool and clean and gentle laid over it, and the old healers, reaching for the house leek from the thatch and the honey from the jar, gave it very nearly that. The comfort was immediate, and the covering of the raw place against the dirt of the world was, though they could not have said so in our terms, close to exactly what it needed. It would be wrong, though, to paint the whole of it as quiet wisdom, and the book itself would not thank us for it. Set among the sensible salves are ingredients that could have done harm, and beliefs about wounds, and their causes that were simply mistaken, for the leech had no notion of the unseen germs that are the real trouble in a wound, and could not, lacking that knowledge, always tell the helpful from the harmful. Some of what he did surely made things worse. What is striking is how much, even so, was sound, how many of his herbs and his methods held real virtue, arrived at not through understanding, but through the long, patient sifting of experience across many generations of healers. There is a picture in this that stays with me, of the leech at his ordinary work, kneeling by a labourer with a torn and dirty wound, cleaning it as best he could, spreading it with a green salve smelling of the herbs of the field, laying honey into it, binding it with a clean cloth, and speaking, most likely, a few quiet words over it as he worked. Much of what he did we would still do, in our fashion. Much we would do differently. But the care itself, the patient attention to a hurt body, the wish to help it mend, is the same care a wound receives from kind hands in any age, and the honey he laid into it would be as welcome now as it was then. We will turn now to the words themselves, the charms and blessings and murmured verses that the leech spoke alongside his herbs, and to why, in his understanding, the saying and the salving could never quite be pulled apart. If you read the Leechbook expecting only herbs and salves and draughts, you will be brought up short, sooner or later, by the words. For the medicine of that age was never only a matter of what was pounded and steeped and spread upon the skin. It was also a matter of what was spoken. Over the remedy, over the wound, over the sick body itself, the leech spoke words, and to him and to his patient those words were as much a part of the healing as anything in the pot. To pull the saying and the salving apart, as we might wish to, would have made no sense to him at all. The words took many forms. Some were plainly Christian, and these grew more common as the centuries passed and the faith sank deeper into every corner of life. A leech might sing the Lord's Prayer over a remedy a set number of times, or make the sign of the cross above a salve or a wound, or call upon a saint known for helping with just this trouble. The herbs in this understanding were God's own gift, planted in the earth for the healing of his people, and to bless them before their use was only to acknowledge where their virtue truly came from. The prayer did not replace the herb. It went with it, hand in hand. Other words were older and stranger, and had come down from a time before the faith, worn now into forms whose meaning had half slipped away. There were charms that were little more than strings of words, some in a broken Latin, some in no clear language at all, sequences of syllables and letters carried forward, and repeated exactly because they had always been repeated, their sense long lost, but their power, it was believed, still holding. A leech might not have been able to say what such a charm meant, only that it was the right thing to say, in the right way, at the right moment, and that his teacher before him had said it just so. To give a sense of how such a charm might run, without troubling to recover its exact old words, imagine a healer gathering a herb at dawn, and, before ever he cuts it, speaking a short blessing over it, asking that its virtue be strong and its use be blessed, perhaps naming God or a saint as he does so. Or imagine him binding a wound, murmuring a set verse 3 times over as he draws the cloth tight, the very words his own teacher once murmured over his own childhood scrapes. The charms were rarely grand or long. They were short, rhythmic, easily remembered things, worn smooth by long repetition, spoken almost under the breath, while the hands went on with their work. Their power lay as much in the saying as in any meaning, in the plain fact that the right words were being spoken, in the right way, at the right moment. The book gives directions for these spoken remedies, as plainly as for any other. Sing this over the herb, it will say, so many times. Write these words, and wash them off into the drink, so that the very letters dissolved are taken into the body. Speak this blessing while you bind the wound. The instructions are exact, the number of repetitions counted, the moment specified, for in this kind of medicine the manner of the saying mattered as much as the words themselves. 3 times or 9 times, the sacred numbers recurring. The charm built up by repetition into something the healer trusted. Some words were meant to be worn rather than spoken. A charm might be written out on a small scrap of parchment, folded tight, and hung about the neck or bound to the aching part, carried against the skin as a quiet, constant remedy. The writing itself, in a world where few could read and fewer still could write, held a power that is hard for us to feel now, the marks on the parchment seeming to hold the words fast, to make them work on and on without needing to be spoken aloud. Such worn charms were among the commonest of all remedies for the fears and troubles that no salve could reach. Some of the written charms took curious shapes upon the parchment. One old and widespread charm against fever was written out as a single word set down again and again, each line dropping a letter, so that the word itself seemed to dwindle away line by line toward nothing, and the fever, it was hoped, would dwindle with it. The shape on the page was itself part of the charm. The shrinking of the written word, standing for the shrinking of the illness. Whether or not the fever obeyed, the sufferer wore the little folded parchment against the skin and felt, perhaps, the illness already beginning to lose its grip, matched letter for letter by the fading word above their heart. It is worth asking, gently, why the words mattered so much, and there is more than one answer. Part of it was plainly religious, the deep conviction that health and sickness lay finally in God's hands, and that no herb would work unless He willed it, so that to heal without prayer was almost to heal without permission. Part of it was older, the long inheritance of a time when illness was fought with word and gesture as much as with plant, absorbed now into Christian forms but never quite lost. And part of it, surely, was the plain steadying power of the words themselves upon the healer and the patient alike. For consider what a charm did, whatever else it did. It gave the frightened sick person something to hold to, a sense that a known and trusted power was being brought to bear on their behalf. It steadied the healer's own hands, giving shape and solemnity to his work, marking this moment as one of care and attention. In a world where so much illness was beyond anyone's real power to mend, the words offered what could always be offered: presence and seriousness, and the assurance that one was not being left to face the trouble alone. That is no small medicine, and it is one we have never truly done without. For we should not imagine ourselves so very far from this. We no longer sing charms over our remedies, but we speak still over the sick. We murmur reassurance at a bedside. We tell a frightened child that all will be well. We say the small steadying things that carry no medicine in them, and yet plainly help. The doctor's calm voice, the nurse's kind word, the whispered comfort of someone who loves us. These are the descendants of the leech spoken charm, and they work upon us in much the same way, settling the mind so that the body may do its own quiet work of mending. The words have changed. The need for them has not. There was scarcely a moment of the healer's work that some word might not accompany. Words were spoken over the herb as it was gathered, and over the salve as it was mixed, and over the draught as it was brewed, and over the sick body as the remedy was given. Words were written out to be worn, and words were washed from parchment into a drink to be swallowed. Words marked the beginning of a treatment and its end, and the turning points between. To follow a leech through a single day would be to hear a low, near, constant murmur of blessing running beneath everything he did, so woven into the work that he would scarcely have known he was doing it, any more than we notice ourselves saying bless you when someone sneezes. The Church, for its part, looked upon all this with a mixture of tolerance and unease. Where the words were plainly holy, a prayer, a blessing, the invocation of a saint, they were welcomed, for who could object to calling on God to heal? Where they shaded into the older, stranger charms, the nonsense, strings and the half, magical gestures, churchmen sometimes frowned and warned against them, and yet they endured, folded so deep into the daily practice of healing that no frown could quite dislodge them. Herb and prayer and charm went on together, as they had always gone, and the Leechbook sets them down side by side, untroubled, as the working medicine of its day. So the picture we should hold is not of two things, a medicine and a magic awkwardly stitched together, but of a single seamless art in which the spoken and the made were always one. The leech gathering his herb might speak the Lord's Prayer over it before he cut it. Mixing his salve, he might bless it. Binding the wound, he might murmur the old words his teacher taught him. Giving the draught, he might have the sick person say a prayer as they drank. At no point did he cross a line between the practical and the sacred, because for him no such line existed. It was all together, the tending of a suffering person, body and soul at once. Let us turn now to the unseen beings that the old healers believed stood behind so much of illness, the elves and the worms and the flying venom, and to the calm, careful remedies they raised against them. To understand a great deal of this medicine, we have to step gently into a way of seeing the world that is not our own. When a person of that age fell ill all at once, with a stabbing pain that came from nowhere, or a fever that shook them and would not leave, or a wasting they could not explain, they did not think, as we do, of unseen germs or hidden failings of the body. They thought often of unseen beings, of elves and dwarves and worms, and of a poison that flew invisible through the very air. The world beyond the firelight was peopled, for them, with powers that could reach in and harm a body, and much of their medicine was raised against exactly these. Chief among these unseen troubles was the elf. The elves of that imagining were not the small, pretty creatures of later tales, but something more uncanny and more dangerous, beings of the wild places who could, it was believed, strike a person or a beast with sudden, invisible harm. There was a whole notion of elf, shot, of the elves loosing unseen darts that lodged in the body and caused a sharp and sudden pain, a stitch in the side, a shooting ache with no visible cause. Cattle suffering a sudden sickness were often thought to be elf, shot, and people too, and the Leechbook and its kin give remedies aimed squarely at this trouble. There was a particular charm, well known now among those who study these things, raised against a sudden stabbing pain in the body, the kind that seizes a person without warning, and it speaks openly of this idea of unseen darts. It tells of loud riders sweeping over the land and loosing their spears, of the shot of the elves, and of other unseen powers, and against all of them it sets the healer's own answering shot, a knife, a herb, a word, sent back to drive the pain out the way it came. Whatever the real ache behind it, a cramp, a stitch, a sudden seizing of the muscles, the charm gave the sufferer a whole small drama in which their pain had a cause, an enemy, and a cure, and that alone must have steadied many a frightened person in the grip of it. There was even a particular ailment the old books call the water, elf disease, described with a strange precision. Its signs set down so that a leech might know it, a certain look to the nails, a certain watering of the eyes, and its own appointed remedy of herbs and words. Whatever the real illness behind the name, and we can only guess, the healers of that age had fitted it into their world, given it a cause they could picture, and a cure they could attempt. The naming and the remedy were themselves a kind of mastery over a frightening thing, a way of making the inexplicable something that could, at least, be faced and fought. The dwarves, too, had their place, and were linked especially with fevers, above all the shaking, recurring kind that came and went in cycles and wore a person down. Such a fever might be imagined as a dwarf that had come to ride the sufferer, and there were charms to name it, to command it, to drive it off, sung over the patient in the grip of the shaking. It is easy to smile at this, but pause a moment over what it meant. A recurring fever is a strange and terrible thing to endure with no understanding of its cause, and to give it a name and a shape, even a dwarf's, was to make it a foe one could at least name in the fight, rather than a formless dread. It helps in all of this to remember how near the wild pressed upon the settled world in that age. Beyond the last field lay the forest and the fen and the open heath, vast, dark, and little known, and it was easy to believe that such places held powers that might wander in toward the firelit edges of human life. The elves belonged to those wild places, and the sudden illnesses they were blamed for seemed to come, like the elves themselves, out of the darkness beyond the door. To raise a salve or a charm against them was, in part, to draw a protecting line around the small warm circle of the household, and to say that here, at least, within these walls, the wild powers should hold no dominion. Then there were the worms, blamed for a whole range of troubles. A worm was thought to gnaw within the aching tooth, causing the pain, and there were remedies to kill or drive it out. Worms were imagined in wounds that would not heal, and in the belly, and the Leechbook gives many a remedy against them. Some aimed at real parasites the body did indeed harbour, some at troubles that had nothing to do with worms at all but were understood that way. The worm was a ready image for anything that seemed to eat away at the body from within, unseen, patient, and destructive. It is worth saying that some of these worms were real enough. The body did indeed harbour parasites, and a remedy given to be rid of worms in the belly might well have met a genuine trouble and done genuine good. What ran wider than the truth was the reaching for the worm as an explanation, the readiness to see a small, gnawing creature behind any pain that seemed to eat away without a visible cause. The image was so apt and so vivid that it was used far beyond the cases where a real worm was to blame, and the aching tooth in particular clung to its imagined worm for many long centuries, well past the time when there was any excuse left for it. And over all of these hung the idea of flying venom, an invisible poison born on the air that could settle on a person and sicken them, and that lay behind the great pestilences and fevers that swept through the land. It was against this flying venom, this unseen poison of the air, that some of the most famous of all the old charms and salves were raised, gathering many herbs together into a single powerful remedy meant to meet a many-sided foe. We will come very soon to the greatest of these, the charm of the 9 herbs, made against 9 such flying venoms at once. What strikes a thoughtful listener, sitting with all this, is not how strange it is, but how understandable. Faced with illness that came swiftly, invisibly, from no cause they could see, these people did what human beings have always done. They gave the invisible a shape. They imagined the unseen attacker, named it, and raised what defenses they could against it. And there is, if we are honest, a curious echo between their invisible elves and flying venoms and our own invisible germs and viruses, unseen agents of disease reaching in from the world outside to harm the body. Their pictures were wrong, and ours are far truer, but the deep human impulse behind both, to find and name the hidden cause of suffering, is one and the same. The remedies they raised against these unseen foes were themselves a blend of everything we have spoken of tonight, herb and word together. A salve against the elf kind might gather many herbs, worked into butter, with holy water added, and prayers or masses sung over it as it was made. The making was long and careful, the ingredients many, the words woven all through it. For a foe as serious as an elf or a flying venom deserved the whole strength of the healer's art, the green power of the herbs, and the spoken power of the charm bound together into one determined remedy. There is something oddly tender in these preparations when you picture them made. A leech in the firelight, gathering a great handful of different herbs, working them patiently into the butter, adding the holy water drop by drop, murmuring the prayers over the pot, all to make a salve against a danger he could not see, and we would say was never there. The care is real, whatever the elf. The wish to protect a frightened, ailing person from the unseen things that seem to threaten them is real. And the remedy, folded round with words and made with such attention, carried at the very least the comfort of knowing that everything possible was being done. We will turn now to the most famous of all these gatherings of herbs against the unseen, the old charm of the 9 herbs, and to the 9 plants it names, each called by its ancient English name, into the fight against the flying venoms of the world. Of all the charms that come down to us from the world of Anglo-Saxon healing, none is more famous or more beautiful than the charm of the 9 herbs. In honesty, it does not sit within Bold's Leechbook itself, but within a sister collection, a more disorderly gathering of remedies made in the same age and the same land, and we shall come to that book presently. Yet it belongs so wholly to the same world of herb and word and unseen venom that we cannot pass a night among these old cures without pausing over it. for it gathers into a single old poem almost everything we have spoken of tonight. The charm is raised against poison and against the flying venoms we met a little while ago, those invisible poisons of the air that were thought to bring pestilence and sickness. Against 9 such venoms it sets 9 herbs, each named and called upon in turn, each praised for its power, as though the healer were mustering 9 green warriors to stand against 9 unseen foes. It is at once a recipe and a poem and a battle song, and it is among the finest things the old English tongue has left us. The first herb named is mugwort, and the charm addresses it directly, bidding it remember what it made known, what it set in order, calling it the eldest of herbs. We met mugwort already among the plants the leech most respected, grey-green by the wayside, wrapped in old regard, and here it stands at the head of the 9, the eldest and the first, as though all the others followed its lead. There is a tenderness in speaking to a plant this way, as to an old and honored friend, reminding it of its own strength and asking it to bring that strength to the fight. Then comes waybread, the tough plantain of the trodden path, and the charm calls it the mother of herbs, open from the east, mighty within. Again we have met it, bruised upon wounds, thriving where it is most trodden, and again the charm lifts it from the plain earth into something honored and addressed. One by one the others follow. There is a cress of the water or the field, and a herb the old tongue calls the venom loather, the very enemy of poison, and mayweed, which is the wild chamomile, and a herb read by some as the crab, apple, and by others as the nettle, and the stinging nettle itself, and last of all chervil and fennel, named together as a mighty pair. 9 herbs in all, though the exact naming of 1 or 2 has grown uncertain across the centuries, their old names no longer answering surely to any plant we now know. There is a striking thing in the way the charm speaks to its herbs. It does not merely list them as a recipe would. It addresses them, one after another, as though they were living persons mustered for a battle, reminding each of its own strength, calling on it by name to stand and to fight. Mugwort is bidden to remember what it once made known. Waybread is hailed as the mother of herbs. Each plant is spoken to directly praised and called into the fray, so that the whole charm reads less like a set of instructions than like a captain rousing his soldiers before a fight, naming each and trusting each to hold its place against the venom set before it. Woven through this naming of herbs is something older and stranger still, a fragment of the old heathen myth that the charm never quite lets go. It tells how the god Woden took 9 glory twigs and struck a serpent with them, so that it flew apart into 9 pieces. 9 twigs, 9 pieces, 9 herbs, 9 venoms, the sacred number returning again and again, binding the whole charm together. And alongside Woden, in the same breath almost, stand Christian words, the name of Christ, the memory of the faith. For by the time this charm was written down, the old myth and the new faith had long been living side by side, and the healer saw no need to choose between them. He called on both. There is a particular fascination in that easy mingling of the old God and the new faith within a single charm. By the time these words were set down, the heathen gods had been formally left behind for generations, their worship gone, their temples long fallen. And yet here is Woden, named without embarrassment in a healing charm copied out, most likely, by a Christian hand. The old story had simply become part of the charm, too deeply woven into it to be picked out again, remembered now as a piece of the remedy, rather than as a matter of belief. It is one of the clearest windows we have onto how gently and how incompletely one world of belief gave way to another, the old surviving quietly inside the new, half forgotten and half kept. That number 9 is worth pausing over, for it runs like a thread through so much of this old medicine. We met it already in the Eye Salve, left to stand for 9 nights in its brass vessel. Here are the 9 herbs, the 9 glory twigs, the 9 venoms. The number carried a deep weight in the old Germanic mind, appearing again and again in its myths and its rituals. 9 worlds, 9 nights, 9 of this and 9 of that, a number that meant completeness and power. To do a thing 9 times, or with 9 parts, was to do it fully, with the whole force the old numbers could lend. The healers reached for 9 the way we reach for a round and final figure, because it felt right and complete and strong. It is worth remembering, too, that this is not only medicine but poetry, and poetry of a high order. The charm of the 9 herbs is counted among the finest surviving pieces of the earliest English verse, shaped in the old measure that bound its lines together by repeated sounds rather than by rhyme, rolling and incantatory, made to be spoken aloud with weight and rhythm. Someone long ago cared enough about these herbs and this charm to give it a real beauty, to make it worth the saying, so that, even now, in whatever tongue we meet it, something of its old music still comes through. The healer who sang it was reciting a poem, and a good one, and the beauty of it was surely part of its power to steady and to comfort. The shape of the charm, its list of 9, its repeated turns and its rolling measure, was itself a help to memory, and this was no accident, in a world where such things lived far more in the mouth than on the page. A charm had to be carried in the head, learned by heart, and spoken from memory over the sick, and the old poets and healers knew well how to build a thing that would hold. The counting off of the 9 herbs, the return again and again to the same sounds and rhythms, the strong and simple frame of it, all made the charm easier to keep whole across a lifetime, and to hand on entire to a pupil than any loose stretch of plain prose could ever have been. The charm was not only spoken but made. The 9 herbs were to be gathered and pounded together, worked with old soap, and with the juice of apple into a paste or salve, and the charm itself sung over them as they were prepared, and sung, too, into the mouth and the ears of the sufferer and upon the wound. So the word and the herb came together once more, exactly as we have seen all night, the green medicine and the spoken medicine bound into a single act. The herbs carried their virtue, the charm carried its power, and the number 9 gathered the whole into something the healer trusted against even the gravest poison. Read now, 1,000 years on, the charm of the 9 herbs is many things at once. It is a genuine remedy, drawing on plants several of which hold real virtue. It is a poem of real beauty, one of the treasures of the earliest English verse. It is a window into a mind in which the old gods and the new faith, the herb and the word, the seen and the unseen, all lived together without strain. And it is, above all, a kind of hymn to the healing power of green and growing things, a naming and a praising of the plants a healer trusted, lifted into song. To hear it is to stand very close to the imaginative heart of this whole old medicine. Let us turn now to the small handful of books, our 9 herbs charm among them. that carry between them almost the whole surviving memory of Anglo-Saxon healing. Bald's Leechbook does not stand alone in the world, though it is the grandest and best ordered of its kind. It is one of a very small company of surviving books, a tiny shelf of manuscripts that together hold nearly everything we know of how the Anglo-Saxons healed. It is worth setting these few sisters beside our book tonight, for each has its own character, and together they round out the picture in a way no single book could. Nearest of all is the third book, bound in the very same manuscript as Bald's 2, the one we set aside earlier and called Leechbook. It shares a binding with Bald's Leechbook, but not its character. Where Bald's 2 books lean heavily on the learned medicine of the South, Leechbook feels older and more homely, more deeply rooted in the native soil. It carries fewer of the classical borrowings and more of the charms, the elf remedies, the flying venoms, the herb and word cures that grew up in the land itself. It is here, in this third book, that some of the strangest and most native of the remedies are found. The water elf disease and its kin, the medicine of a people speaking, as it were, in their own oldest voice. You can feel the difference the moment you turn from Bald's careful pages to this third book. The remedies come thicker with charm and belief. The classical authorities fall away, and the old native world presses closer. Here are cures against the elf, kind and the flying venom, salves made with holy water and sung over as they were made, the whole imaginative medicine of elves and worms and unseen darts that we spent an earlier part of our evening among. If Bald's 2 books show us the Anglo-Saxon healer reaching outward, toward the learning of the wider world, this third book shows him turned homeward, toward the oldest lore of his own people, and it is the more precious for it. Then there is the more disorderly sister that holds our 9 herbs charm, a book gathered without the neat head, to heal ordering of Bald's. A kind of healer's commonplace book into which remedies and charms were copied down as they came, in no great scheme. It is a magpie's hoard of a book, bright with odd and precious things, remedies jostling charms, Latin prayers beside Old English verse, the practical and the strange all heaped together. If Bald's Leechbook is a well-ordered cabinet, this book is a healer's crowded shelf, and it preserves, in its very untidiness, treasures that a tidier book might never have kept, the 9 herbs charm among them. There is a real value in that very disorder, easy to miss at first. A tidy, well-planned book keeps only what its plan allows, and quietly leaves out whatever will not fit. A crowded commonplace book, gathering whatever came to hand, keeps the odd and the unclassifiable, the stray charm, the local cure, the thing too strange for a grander book to admit. Much of what is most vivid and most human in the old medicine survives precisely because someone, long ago, jotted it down without once worrying whether it belonged, into a book that had no scheme by which to exclude it. The untidiness was itself a kind of net, catching and keeping what neatness would have let quietly fall. There is, besides, a book of a quite different kind, an English herbal, a book given over to describing plants one by one and setting out their uses. It was made by translating an older Latin herbal into English, so that the descriptions of the plants and the pictures that sometimes went with them might be understood by those who had no Latin. It opens, fittingly, with Bethany, that most prized of herbs, and works through plant after plant, a reference book of the green world, sitting alongside the recipe, books as the dictionary sits alongside the cookbook. Between them, the recipe books and the herbal covered both the how and the what of the herbal medicine. Some copies of that English herbal were made with pictures, a drawing of each plant set beside its description, so that a reader might come to know the herb by sight as well as by name. The drawings were not always faithful, being copied from copy to copy, until a plant might grow strange in the copying. But the intention behind them is a fine one. The wish to put a true likeness of each healing plant into the reader's own hands. A herbal with pictures was a double gift, telling both what a plant did and what it looked like, and it stands at the head of a long line of illustrated plant books that runs down, all but unbroken, into the field guides on our own shelves today. These few books, and a scattering of smaller fragments beside them, are very nearly the whole of it. When we speak of Anglo-Saxon medicine, we are speaking, for the most part, of what these handful of surviving manuscripts happen to contain. It is a sobering thought, and a humbling one. A whole people's healing, the accumulated knowledge of generations of leeches across centuries, has come down to us through this small and fragile shelf of books, and through nothing else. Everything that was never written down, and everything written down in books that did not survive, is simply gone, silent forever. When you gather up the whole of it, the few great medical manuscripts, and the scattering of smaller fragments beside them, you are holding a library you could carry in your two arms. That is very nearly all that remains in the English tongue of the healing knowledge of centuries. It is a thought that lends each surviving leaf a particular weight. Behind these few books stand countless healers who left nothing, countless remedies spoken, and never once written, countless other books that burned or rotted, or were simply cut up to bind newer books when their old language grew strange. What we have is the little that came through the fire, and it must speak now for all the rest. Today, these surviving books are among the most treasured possessions of the libraries that hold them, kept with the same care as any crown jewel. Studied by scholars who have given their lives to the old tongue and the old medicine. Each has been read and reread, its every remedy weighed, its sources traced as far back as they can be followed. What began as working tools, opened by lamplight beside the sick, have become windows instead, through which we look back across 1,000 years at how a whole people once understood the body and its troubles. The healer who used them would be astonished, perhaps, to learn what his plain handbook had become, and how carefully it is now kept, and how much is now read into every line he wrote without a second thought. That makes each of these surviving books more precious than its plain appearance might suggest. Each is not merely a book, but a survivor, carrying knowledge that would otherwise have vanished utterly, and they lean on one another, too, sharing remedies, drawing on common sources, echoing one another's charms and cures, so that a remedy found in one may turn up, a little changed in another, and the whole small company can be read together, each book filling out and confirming the others. To study one is to be led, before long, to all of them. It is sobering to think by how narrow a margin any of them reached us. Books that had stood for centuries were lost in a single night when a library burned, or scattered and destroyed when the great religious houses that had long kept them were broken up and emptied, their contents sold, given away, or simply thrown out. A book might survive 1,000 years and then perish in an afternoon. That ours did not, that it passed through every fire and every upheaval and came out whole, is a thing to be quietly grateful for, and a reminder of how much else, just as precious, did not come through at all, and is lost to us now beyond any recovering. There is a quiet fellowship in imagining these books together, made by different hands in different houses, across the same land and the same age, and surviving, against all odds, into a single distant future where they might be gathered and read side by side. They did not know of one another's survival, those scribes. Each simply did his work, copying what seemed worth keeping, and set his finished book adrift on the long river of time, not knowing which would sink and which would come through. That ours came through, and a few of its sisters with it, is the reason we can spend a night like this one at all, turning their pages together in the dark. We will turn now, as our evening begins to draw toward its close, to the gentlest and perhaps the most surprising question of all, the question of how much, in the end, this old Leechcraft actually got right. For a very long time, the plain answer given to our question was nothing. The medicine of the Anglo-Saxons and of the whole long medieval age was dismissed as little more than ignorance and superstition, a dark muddle of charms and guesswork and useless herbs, from which the modern world had thankfully escaped. It was the fashion to smile at it and to be glad one had been born later. But a fairer and more patient look, of the kind our own age has slowly learned to give, finds something rather different and rather more humbling. A surprising amount of it worked, or at least held a real kernel of sense. We have already met the plainest proof, the eye salve that killed a stubborn modern germ in the laboratory. But it does not stand alone. The honey the leech laid into wounds has proven a genuine and lasting remedy, back in use in our own hospitals. The plants he trusted for wounds, the yarrow and the woundwort and the waybread, hold real virtues that later study has confirmed. Again and again, where we have troubled to look closely, we have found that the old healers, for all they could not explain, had hit upon things that truly do something. Consider the willow, whose bark the old healers chewed and steeped for pain and for fever. We now know that willow bark holds within it the natural forerunner of one of the most familiar medicines in the modern world, the very substance from which a common pain reliever was later made. When a leech gave willow for an aching head or a feverish body, he was giving, without the least idea of the chemistry, a real and effective remedy that we still, in a refined form, reach for today. The knowledge was true. Only the understanding of why was missing, and the why, in the end, is not what eases a headache. The same could be said of a good many of the plants in the book. Garlic, that humble bulb at the heart of the eye salve, has real power against certain germs. Mint eases the troubled stomach it was always given for. Poppy dulls pain, as the old healers knew when they gave it before the knife. The bitter herbs, given for the digestion, do stir the digestion. The list is long, longer than the old dismissive verdict would ever have allowed, and it grows as we keep looking. These were not random weeds pressed into service by the credulous. They were plants whose virtues had been found, tested, and confirmed by the slow trial of generations. There is a name for the way they came by this knowledge, though they had no name for it themselves. It was trial and error, patiently repeated across generations, the same slow method by which so much true knowledge has always been won. A healer noticed that a certain herb seemed to ease a certain trouble more often than not. He used it again, and it helped again, and he told his apprentice, who used it and found the same, and told his own apprentice in turn. Across many lives and many cases, the herbs that truly helped were kept, and the useless ones quietly dropped, and what remained, gathered at last into a book, was a rough distillation of centuries of patient watching. It was not science as we know it, but it was not nothing either. It was the honest sifting of experience, and it worked more often than we once allowed. Beyond the single herbs, the broader habits of the Leechcraft often make good sense as well. To clean a wound, to cover it, to lay honey in it, to keep it still, is close to what a wound truly needs. To feed the sick warmly and lightly, to give them rest, to press a warm drink into their hands, is sound care in any age. To counsel moderation in food, and drink and feeling. The great teaching of the humoral medicine is advice no physician would quarrel with now. Even where the specific remedy did little, the shape of the care around it often did real good. A person who believes they are being helped, who is warm and resting and attended to, who has been given something and told that it will ease them, often does genuinely feel better, and sometimes genuinely mends the faster, for reasons our own age has studied and confirmed. The old healers could not have explained this, but they practiced it perfectly, wrapping every remedy in attention and expectation and calm. The salve might be all but inert, and yet the whole occasion of the salving, the coming, the touching, the words, the promise, was itself a kind of medicine, and not always a weak one. Strip away the theory, and a great deal of the practice was simply the accumulated good sense of people who had watched many sick bodies and learned what tended to help. None of this is to pretend they got everything right, for they plainly did not, and honesty asks us to say so. They had no notion of the germs that cause infection, and so could not truly guard against them. They drew blood far more often than any good could come of, trusting a theory that has not survived. Some of their ingredients were useless, and a few could do harm. They died in great numbers, of illnesses we now cure without a second thought. And their lives were shorter and harder than the softest account of them would suggest. We should not romanticize a world in which so much suffering went unhealed. The right note to strike, then, is neither scorn nor sentiment, but a plain and level respect. We need not pretend the old medicine was secretly the equal of ours, for it was not, and we are fortunate to live long after so much has been learned. But neither should we look back and see only darkness and folly, for that is not the truth either. We should see, instead, careful people working hard at a difficult thing with the little they had, getting a fair part of it right, handing on faithfully what they found and easing, where they could, a great deal of suffering they could not cure. That is worth our respect, and it costs us nothing at all to give it, and it leaves the past a kinder and a truer place than the old scorn ever did. But the deep lesson of a book like this is not that the old medicine was secretly as good as ours. It is something gentler and more interesting than that. It is that useful knowledge can run ahead of understanding, that people can find out that a thing works long before anyone can say why. Through nothing but patient watching and the honest passing on of what seemed to help. The leech who brewed the Eye Salve could not have told you a word about bacteria. He only knew, or half knew, that the salve often eased a sore eye. And that plain knowing, humble as it was, turned out to hold a truth that our own bright understanding is still, in some corners, catching up with. There is a last thing the Leechcraft got right, and it is the one most easily overlooked, because it is not a matter of herbs at all. It is care. Whatever the remedy, whatever its true worth, the leech came when he was called. He sat with the sick. He gave them his attention, his steady hands, his quiet words, the sense that they were not alone in their trouble, and that everything that could be done was being done. That care is a real medicine, one that eases suffering, even when it cannot cure it, and it is one the oldest healers understood as well as any modern one. In that, at least, they were never behind us at all. We might even say they understood something we have had to relearn, in our own time, after an age of great cures. Briefly, let us forget it. A medicine is never only the drug it delivers. It is also the hand that gives it, the voice that reassures, the presence that stays. The old healers, having so few cures that truly worked, leaned all the harder on the care that always did, and in that leaning they kept alive a truth that even the most powerful modern medicine can never really afford to lose. So the honest answer to our gentle question is a generous one. They got a great deal right, more than their reputation ever allowed. And where they were wrong in the way all seekers are wrong, doing their best with what they had, and handing on faithfully whatever seemed to work. It is a good reason to close the book, not with a smile at their expense, but with something closer to respect, and even gratitude, across the long distance between their firelit rooms and our own. Let us turn now, as the last of our chapters, to the strange long life of the book itself, its 1,000-year sleep, and its slow and gentle waking into our own age. When Cild laid down his pen, the book began a journey none of its makers could have foreseen, a journey not through space but through time, down the long centuries toward us. For a while, no doubt, it was simply used, opened and consulted, and leaned over exactly as it was meant to be, a working tool in a healer's hands. But the world it was made for did not last. Within a few generations, great changes swept over England, a new ruling people, a new tongue at the top of society, and slowly the old English in which the book was written began to fade from common use, until the day came when few could easily read it any longer. And so the book fell quiet, not lost, not destroyed, but set aside, its language grown strange, its remedies passed over for newer fashions. It became one of those old volumes that a library keeps without quite reading, valued perhaps as an antique curiosity, its dense old script a barrier few cared to cross. Through the long medieval centuries and beyond, it slept, passing quietly from hand to hand, and shelf to shelf, surviving the fires and the damp, and the neglect that swallowed so many of its fellows, by nothing more than good fortune and the habit of not throwing old books away. Even in its long quiet, the book was not wholly forgotten. Here and there, across the centuries, some scholar with a taste for the old tongue would take it down, puzzle at its script, copy out a remedy or two, and marvel at the strangeness of it. Collectors valued it as an antiquity, a curious relic of a vanished England, even when they could make little of its contents. It survived in part, simply because it was interesting to look upon, a venerable old thing worth the keeping, and so it was kept and passed carefully along, waiting, though no one knew that it was waiting, for an age that would learn to read it properly again. In time it came into a great collection, the old library of the kings of England, gathered over generations and kept as a treasure of the crown. And when at last that royal library was given over into the keeping of the nation, to be held for everyone rather than for the king alone, the Leechbook passed with it into public hands, coming to rest at last in the great national collection where it remains today. It had travelled, by then, further in years than any of its makers could have dreamed, and it was very nearly forgotten, a silent book in an old script that scarcely anyone could read. Those were long centuries of quiet for the book, and it is worth dwelling a moment on how such a thing survives when it is no longer read. It became, in effect, an object rather than a text, valued for its age and its strangeness rather than for its contents, wrapped and shelved and inventoried, carried from one collection to another as libraries were gathered and broken up and gathered again. No one was using its remedies. No one, for long stretches, could even read them. And yet it was kept because it was old, and old things were felt to be worth keeping, and in that plain instinct to preserve, if only as a curiosity, lay the whole reason we have it now. Its waking, when it came in the century before our own. A scholar of a clerical turn, patient and devoted to the old English past, set himself to gather up these neglected medical manuscripts, to read their difficult script, to translate them, and to print them where all could reach them. He gave his great collection a title that gathered the whole old art into 3 plain words: the leechdoms, the word cunning, and the starcraft of early England, the cures, the plant lore, and the reading of the heavens. And with that printing the long sleep of the Leechbook was broken. What had lain silent for centuries could be read again, studied, argued over, and loved. That editing was a labour of real devotion, and worth pausing over. To take a 1,000-year-old manuscript, in a script and a language that few could read, and to render it faithfully into print, with a translation set alongside, is slow and exacting work, done for love far more than for any reward. The man who did it gave years to these neglected old books, believing that the medicine of early England deserved to be known and not left mouldering unread. Because of that patient labour, what had been the possession of a mere handful of specialists became, at last, something that anyone curious might open and explore, and the Leechbook rejoined the living conversation of all those who care about the past. From that waking, everything else has followed. Scholars learned to read the book closely, to trace its sources, to understand its place in the medicine of its age. Its language was studied, its remedies catalogued, its charms set beside those of its sister books. And in our own time the waking has gone further still, for every page of the manuscript has now been carefully photographed and made freely visible, so that anyone, anywhere, may look upon Cild's own writing without ever leaving home. The book that once existed as a single object in a single room now exists, in a sense, everywhere at once, its 1,000-year-old pages open to the whole world. There is something fitting in that final turn, the book that was once a single fragile object becoming, in a sense, endlessly available, unable now to be truly lost at all. For 1,000 years its survival hung on the fate of one stack of leaves, one fire, one careless hand away from oblivion. Now its every page is held in many places at once, copied beyond any real possibility of loss, safe at last in a way its makers could never have secured it. The book that so nearly vanished, and more than once, is now among the most secure things in the world, and Cild's patient hand is preserved forever, whatever should become of the vellum itself. And then, of course, came the strangest waking of all, the one we spoke of earlier, when the old Eye Salve was brewed again in a modern laboratory and found to hold a real and living power. It was as though the book, having slept so long and woken so slowly, had one more surprise to offer, one last quiet proof that it was not merely an antique to be studied, but a living record of things genuinely found and genuinely known. 1,000 years after Cild wrote it out, the book was still in its way, teaching, still able to astonish the very age that had once dismissed it. The manuscript itself, through all of this, rests quietly where it is kept, a small stack of vellum leaves in a controlled and careful dark, brought out rarely and handled with the greatest care. On the rare occasions it is brought out now, it is treated as the treasure it has become, laid upon a cushioned rest, its leaves turned by careful hands, watched over and studied. It will never again be splashed with the juice of a pounded herb, or carried out into a sick room by lamplight. Its working days are long done. But it is safer now than it has ever been, cared for as its own makers could never have cared for it, and likely to outlast, by a very long way, everyone now living who has bent to read it. It asks nothing now. Its long working life is over. Its remedies no longer brewed in earnest, its charms no longer sung over the sick. It has become something else, a survivor, a witness, a bridge across 1,000 years, carrying the voices of Bold and Cild, and all the nameless healers behind them forward into a world they could never have imagined. And on a quiet night like this one, it lets us turn its pages gently and listen. And so the strange long journey comes round, at the last to us, here, tonight. The same words that Cild set down by candlelight in an English town more than 1,000 years ago can be called up now, in an instant, onto a lit screen anywhere on earth, or read in a printed book, or brewed, in one famous instance, back into a living salve. The long sleep is well and truly over. The book has woken into a world it could never have imagined, and been found, in that world, to be not a dead curiosity, but a living record, still able to teach, still able to surprise. Its makers are long gone, and the healers behind them are nameless, but the careful work of their hands has come through, whole, across all those years, to reach us where we lie. We have wandered a long way tonight, and it is time now to let the book close, and to let the evening close with it. We began by opening a single volume, more than 1,000 years old, the Healer's Book that Bold owned and Cild wrote out by candlelight in an English town long ago. We read its plain vellum pages, and its careful hand, and the two names at its end. We learned what a leech was, and where and when the book was made, and how it gathered the medicine of the far south together with the herb, lore of the near north, into a single ordered English book. We walked down its pages from the head to the heel, past the knife and the cautery, through the theory of the Four Humours and the gentle medicine of warm food and drink. We spent time among its herbs, the batony and the waybread and the mugwort, and we sat with its most famous page, the Eye Salve of garlic and gall that woke again in our own age. We met the honey laid into wounds, and the words spoken over the herb, and the elves and the flying venom, and the 9 green herbs sung against them. We set the book beside its few surviving sisters, and we asked, at the last, how much of it was true, and found the answer kinder than we might have guessed. There is nothing at all to remember from any of it. Let every name drift away now, the herbs and the charms, the scribe and his master, the whole long 1,000-year journey of a small quiet book. They will keep. They have kept for 1,000 years already, and they will keep until you wish to return to them. Tonight they have done their work, which was only ever to walk beside you gently into sleep, and they ask nothing further of you now. Let your breath grow slow and easy. Let the book close in your mind, its pages settling, its candle burning low. The healer's long day is over, his remedies set back on their shelf, his fire gone quietly to embers. There is nothing left to tend, and nothing left to do, and the whole of the night lies open and unhurried before you. Sleep well. The quiet apothecary will be back soon with another quiet chapter. The candle gutters low now, and the old book rests closed upon the table, its 1,000 years settling softly into the dark, and beyond the window, the long night keeps its own slow watch and asks nothing of you at all but that you rest.